We had been driving through the forest for about 20 minutes when my daughter started acting strange. Kylie was ordinarily a loud and active toddler, with so much energy that my wife and I usually had to drag ourselves along behind her. Yet now, in the shadow of the huge evergreens, she had fallen silent. "Everything okay back there?" I asked. No response. "You excited about visiting the park, honey? We might even see a bear." I tried again. Still nothing. Kylie was staring with absolute concentration at these shadows beneath the trees. "Kylie, honey." My wife Heather reached back and shook Kylie's knee. "There's a man in the woods," and Kylie said simply. "Well, of course there is, honey. It's a national park." I laughed, but Kylie just scowled and looked back out the window. I sighed. The sun was just starting to cast its golden beams through the misty woods, and if Kylie was in one of her moods, we had a very long day ahead of us. I spotted a gravel turnoff up the road, and it occurred to me that maybe Kylie was just grumpy from the long car ride. My wife and I were plenty sore ourselves, and the prospect of dipping our feet in a cool mountain stream was too good to miss. I pulled in beside a dusty pickup truck and flashed a mischievous grin at Heather. We were both out the door as soon as the wheels had stopped rolling. Kylie, however, refused to budge. "This is a bad place. I don't wanna." My daughter crossed her arms. There was no reasoning with her when she was like this. I nodded to my wife and we each grabbed an arm to lift her out of the car seat. Kylie wailed and clawed, putting up such a fight that I was grateful that I had trimmed her nails in the hotel room the night before. I looked over my shoulder at the pickup and winced. If the driver was around, he would probably think that Kylie was being kidnapped. "There's a creek down there with big rocks and fish and waterfalls," I cooed. "You're gonna love it, Kai." Suddenly, my daughter stopped crying, but it didn't have anything to do with my pep talk. "Okay, Daddy, let's go." Her arms had gone slack, her face blank. I had only ever seen her like this once before when our plane had hit a gut-dropping patch of turbulence, the kind that makes passengers wail, luggage fall, and lights flicker. But then as now, she had just shut down, too frightened to function. I couldn't imagine what was scaring her so badly. Apart from the rustling leaves and the murmur of the stream down below, the early morning forest was still. I slipped a neon pink jacket over Kylie's head before lifting her onto my shoulders and starting down the steep and muddy trail. Heather let out a loud whoop and sprinted past me. I winced. It felt wrong to disturb the silence. I thought and then wondered if Kylie's irrational fear had infected me as well. We found Heather lying on a smooth white stone beside the water, kicking her feet in the rapids. "It's so peaceful here." She smiled and I had to agree. Even Kylie seemed to be doing better. She sat at the edge of the rock, absent-mindedly tugging at clumps of moss. "You're pretty quiet, champ." Heather rustled our daughter's hair. "I'm listening to the man in the woods," Kylie replied with that same flat voice. A shiver ran up my spine. Most toddlers say creepy things from time to time, but Kylie had never gone this deep into her daydreams before. "What man in the woods?" "Honey, nobody's talking." "Yes, he is. I can hear him. He's talking inside my head." Heather and I traded a glance. "What's the man saying, champ?" Heather asked. Kylie just frowned and pulled away as if to say that whatever it was none of our business. The morning air suddenly seemed just a little bit cooler. A bird took off from a branch above us and Heather and I both jumped. But not Kylie. Our daughter was staring dead ahead at something on the other side of the creek. Before either of us could stop her, she got on all fours and scurried across these smooth river rocks. It's amazing how fast small children can move when they really want to. By the time that we got to our feet, Kylie was halfway across the creek. Not being a barefoot toddler myself, I slipped almost instantly, plunging into the freezing, waist-deep water. My daughter, meanwhile, had already reached the far bank. I felt a sudden, horrible certainty that if she climbed up it, we would never see her again. Fortunately, my wife was a lot less clumsy than I was. Jumping from rock to rock, she managed to grab the back of Kylie's pink jacket, seconds before she disappeared into the ferns. Ordinarily, Kylie screamed her head off whenever we stopped her from doing what she wanted. But now she was calm. In fact, she was giggling. Daddy got wet. Kylie, it is not okay to run off like that. What's gotten into you? My wife demanded. He said it would be funny. Our daughter replied with an all too adult sneer in her eyes. And he was right. Only then did it occur to me to climb the eroded bank and see what had made Kylie so eager to cross the stream. My fingers sank into the mud as I pulled myself upward, and then I fell back with a yelp as sharp teeth sank into my ankle. Kylie, Heather yelled. My daughter had bitten me. He doesn't like it when you look, Kylie hissed. That's enough, I grunted and picked my daughter up. She went into full tantrum mode, battering me with her tiny fists, but I was finally able to peer over the muddy creek bank. I saw only more trees, rotting logs, and a carpet of decaying leaves. Whatever Kylie had been so eager to get to, it was long gone. It was the worst fit that Kylie had thrown in years, maybe ever. Getting a flailing, screaming, biting child back across these slippery rocks was not an easy feat. By the end of it, all three of us were soaked and exhausted. I reached out for the car door and patted my hip for my keys. They weren't there. Had their clip come undone when I had fallen in the water, or had Kylie pulled them off on purpose? I didn't like to think about what that might mean. Now the keys, I groaned. I have to go back. Heather looked up at me from where she was struggling with Kylie. Her eyes begged me not to go. I understood how she felt. The day had suddenly turned strange and wrong, and all I wanted to do now was get back in the car with my family, drive out of the forest, and forget that any of it had ever happened. I glanced over at the pickup truck beside us. It was covered with dust and dead leaves, as though it had been sitting there abandoned for years. And what had happened to the driver? Something seemed to slither beneath the grimy blue tarp in the truck bed. I shuddered and turned back to my family. Kylie had finally calmed down. She sat in the gravel, messy hair hanging over her face, not saying a word. Babe, please, my wife whispered. Why don't we just go back to the road? We can flag someone down and ask them to call for help. Images flashed through my mind. Long, hungry hours waiting for some smug tow truck driver. Yet another bill for my already bloated credit card. Kylie crying nonstop, our vacation ruined. No, I couldn't let that happen. All I had to do was walk back down the trail and grab my keys. So why did that suddenly feel so hard to do? I took a last look around. The winding two-lane road should have been packed, but not a single car had passed by. I could feel my wife's eyes on the back of my neck pleading with me. Stay, they seemed to say. I'm scared. As much as I wanted to, somebody had to get us out of the woods. Shivering in my waterlogged jeans, I stuffed my hands into my pockets and trudged back down the trail. I found myself wishing that somebody else would appear, just to confirm that we were still inside the borders of the national park at all. A grimy backpacker, an old fisherman on his way to the creek, anybody other than Kylie's man in the woods. Although I kept my eyes down in search of the keys, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd look up and find him just in front of me, like the Green Knight from some childhood storybook, A mossy beard, a crown of antlers, golden animal eyes. A footstep crunched in the leaves to my left. Glancing up, I saw an enormous stag making its way through the trees. There was something unsettling about the way that it moved. It didn't look my way, didn't freeze when it saw me. It just kept walking straight ahead, like it was being guided by some terrible purpose. It was heading for the car. I jogged back up the slick path. The stag had reached the edge of the forest. Heather, oblivious, was squatting in the gravel trying to talk to Kylie. My daughter sat with eerie patience, staring straight ahead, like she knew the stag was coming. From my vantage point, I could see how it walked out from the tree line and knelt down in front of her, as though inviting her to ride it. I could hear my wife and daughter arguing. "Honey, get back here, that's a wild animal, you don't know what it might do." "The man in the woods say that I should go with it, Mommy. He says where I'm going there's lots of other kids just like me." Heather had heard enough. She grabbed for Kylie's arm, but the stag came between them. Snorting and frothing at the mouth, it reared back and rammed its head into my wife's chest. Heather flew backwards, impacting against the driver's side mirror with a sickening crack. She crumpled to the ground and lay still. Kylie, meanwhile, was already climbing onto the stag's back. "No!" I screamed. "Kylie, wait!" But the big animal was already moving. My daughter clung to the mangy fur of its neck. Her golden hair flashed in a beam of sunlight, and then she and the stag were gone, swallowed by the shadows of the forest. I ran to my wife. Heather was hurt but still breathing. I was trying desperately to remember my Cub Scout first aid when I heard tires crunching on the gravel. It was an ancient Park Service vehicle, and the woman behind the wheel looked just as grizzled as the car itself. She couldn't have been older than 30, but her sharp green eyes missed nothing. "Everything all right here, sir?" the ranger asked. Her hand was on the pistol at her hip as she stepped out of the vehicle. "My wife, she was attacked by a deer," I stammered. "And my daughter, she's missing." "Let me see her hands." I did as I was told. I realized that she was looking for blood or bruising on my knuckles, signs that I had been the one to slam my wife against the side of the car. "Okay," she grunted. "Step back." She bent down to inspect Heather. My wife let out a gasp as the ranger pressed on her right side. "Ribs broken," the ranger grunted. "Should probably get her to a doctor." "Now, what is this that I hear about a missing daughter?" I launched into my story, leaving out the harder-to-believe elements made sense at the time. I told the ranger that Kylie had simply run off into the woods after a deer. Only later would I realize what a terrible mistake that I had made. "Oh, time's a-wasting then," the ranger grunted. "Most lost kids are found within a couple of hours. The ones who aren't." She trailed off, bent low over some knobs and buttons in her cruiser, and then returned with a frown. "And we always get bad reception out here. Ma'am, are you gonna be alright to rest in the backseat of the cruiser while we look for your little girl?" My wife winced but nodded. The old-fashioned pack that the ranger extracted from her trunk looked bigger than she was, but she hitched it onto her back with ease. Her uniform too wasn't quite what it used to be, but the Forest Service brown color was familiar enough. "Well," she asked, "you coming or not?" In between shouts of Kylie's name, the ranger introduced herself as Maddie Corvin. "We'll do a quick search of the area, but after that I'm going in for backup," Ranger Corvin said. "Keep the cruiser in sight at all times. You might think you know where the road is, but trust me, it's easy to get turned around out here." I could see what she meant. No matter which way I was facing, the carpet of ferns and dead leaves looked the same. Enormous tree trunks rose up from it like columns in some ancient temple. And then I glimpsed something that made my breath catch in my throat. A hot pink jacket. Ranger Corvin was yelling after me, but I only had thoughts for that sad little jacket laying in the mud. I ran to it and flipped it over. A pale, lifeless face stared up at me. Its eyes were hollow pits, its mouth a crimson smile sliced from ear to ear. A strangled cry escaped my lips, and it took me a long moment to realize that I was looking at some sort of doll. Its head was made of an empty hornet's nest, its grin painted on with what looked like berry juice. Who would make something like this? A bony hand squeezed my shoulder and I jumped. Maddie Corvin glared down at me. "I warned you not to run off on your own," she spat. I didn't understand why she was so angry until I had looked around. I could no longer see the parking lot or the trail, and I had no clue how to get back, and from the expression of Ranger Corvin's face, neither did she. She took out a compass and we both waited while the needle spun, and spun, and spun. Ranger Corvin took a deep breath, the kind you take when you're trying to get your fear under control. She replaced the compass on the side of her pack, extracted some reflective tape from a side pocket, and then wrapped a strip of it around a nearby tree. "It looks like old Higgs wasn't completely full of shit after all," she muttered. "Huh?" I asked. "Oh, Bert Higgs, my predecessor. He used to say that all sorts of strange stuff happened on this side of the park." "What did he say?" "I don't know, never paid him much attention. I always figured that he was messing with me, 'cause he didn't like women in the service. I joined up in '73 and he retired 2 years later." My heart skipped a beat. There was no way that the 30-something woman in front of me had joined the park service in 1973. The unusual uniform, the old-fashioned cruiser and bulky backpack, it was all starting to make sense. What year do you think it is?" "Well, it's 1975. Maddie Corvin stared at me like I was crazy. "Why? What year do you think it is?" Before I could answer, a snapping twig made us both spin. The stag. I had always considered deer to be harmless, innocent animals. I had cried when Bambi's mom died, and hunting had always made me queasy. But there was nothing harmless or innocent about the beast that was staring us down. Foam frothed on its black lips and its eyes glowed with a hateful alien light. It stomped at the ground, and that's when I realized that it was getting ready to charge. "Look out!" Maddie started to yell, but I was already running. The primitive monkey part of my brain wanted to scramble up a tree, but the branches were too high. And meanwhile, the stag's hoofbeats were closing in. A brown blur passed beside me. Maddie Corvin. She was making for a narrow gap between two of the mossy boulders up ahead. She dived into the narrow and jagged space, and I threw myself in after her. Seconds later, antlers cracked against the rock behind me, and then again and again. Ranger Corvin and I had backed as deep into the crevice as we could. The stag's antlers were too wide for it to pass, but it still gnashed at us with its square, herbivore teeth, like it was trying to eat us alive. Blood poured down its forehead, but it kept battering its body against the stone until it finally crumpled to the ground and lay still. Maddie and I looked at each other. She approached and opened one of its tightly closed eyelids with 2 fingers. The eerie light was gone from its eyes. The stag was dead. I asked Maddie if this was normal behavior for the deer around here. She looked at me like she wanted to skewer me on the stag's antlers herself. I could see why she was so frustrated. In our haste to flee the stag, we had completely lost sight of the tape-marked tree. Or so I thought. Even though Maddie had only marked 1 tree, behind us were 6 of them, each indicating that we had come from a different direction. What the hell was going on here? "Okay, so the tape isn't going to work," Maddie said numbly. "What about the rocks? These boulders had to roll down from someplace. We can follow them uphill until we're high enough to see the road." I squeezed the pink jacket in my hand. Kylie loved exploring, loved looking over the edge of high places. Would she also think to follow the big stones uphill? It was slow going. There was no path through these sea of ferns and enormous trees, no indication of direction apart from the trail of boulders. No birds sang, no squirrels leapt from branch to branch. The quiet made me paranoid. I kept looking over my shoulder when I really should have been paying more attention to what was in front of me. I was about to take another step when I felt a weight on my shoe. Something cold and heavy slithered across my foot. I heard a rattle. No, a lot of rattles. The ferns around us were rustling, but not because of any breeze. Maddie Corvin froze and we made eye contact, and she reached slowly for the nearest boulder. I copied her. The feel of the rough stone was reassuring, but would I be able to scramble up it in time? No quick movements, I warned myself. Do not panic. No matter what happens, do not panic. With a shout and a kick, Maddie Corvin sprung onto the rock. Something long and writhing snapped at her as it fell from her leg. She was clinging to the rock by her toes and fingernails, but she made it. Meanwhile, the rattling around me had intensified. My blood turned to ice as the thing on my foot began to coil its way up my bare leg. Its scales were cold against my skin. The tongue of a second snake had flickered against my ankle. "Maddie," I whispered, "get going and find Kylie." The look in Ranger Corvin's eyes as she looked back at me told me that I was a dead man. But she understood that Kylie was my priority. She scrambled up the boulder and out of sight. The serpent coiled around my thigh and squeezed tighter. I held my breath, waiting for its bite, but it never came. The snake, wrapped around my ankle, hissed up at it, and with a hiss of its own, it slithered down my other pant leg and out the cuff of my jeans. It was now or never. I very slowly lifted my boot and planted it on the rock. I would only get one chance at this, and if I fell, I was a dead man. Fangs shot out of the ferns and buried themselves in the sole of my shoe, and that was all the motivation that I needed. I threw myself against the rock face and clawed my way to the top of the boulder. The ground below looked deceptively peaceful from up here, and Ranger Corvin was nowhere to be found. I climbed from stone to stone until the slope of the land grew steeper. Up ahead, a jagged black cave opened in the cliff face like a hungry and toothless maw. Several objects hung from the branches around it, more of those creepy dolls. The gruesome style was the same as before, but the clothes that they were wearing were different. "Where I'm going, there are lots of kids like me," Kylie had said. And did each one of those figurines represent a kidnapped child? I shivered. The breeze from the cave was musty and cold. Whatever was causing the strangeness in this part of the park clearly emanated from here. The dolls were proof enough of that. Did I really think that I stood a chance against something that could vanish at will, control the minds of animals, and send a horde of snakes slithering down the side of a mountain? It didn't matter. My daughter's life was at stake. So much had changed after Kylie was born, and one of the things I left behind was my cigarette habit. I used to smoke about a pack a day, but during my wife's pregnancy, I cut it back to 0. Even so, I never stopped carrying a lighter in my pocket. I couldn't have said why. Maybe I imagined having one last toke in my final moments, like some 80 movies action hero. But instead, that frail piece of plastic was about to be my only source of light as I entered the cave ahead. The sloping stone ceiling grew lower and lower as I walked. I've always been claustrophobic, and soon I was afraid that I would have to crawl in the dirt alongside the hand-sized cave spiders. But the path never grew so narrow. In fact, I couldn't shake the feeling that something just a little bit taller than me had been moving through here for so long that the tunnels had accommodated to its shape. Before long, the daylight and fluttering insects of the surface world were gone. There was nothing but me and my lighter, and I had no idea how much juice it had left. At any moment it might burn out, leaving me in total darkness. The flame reflected off of something up ahead, dark and rainbow patterns shifted on its surface. reminding me of oily water, but the stuff was too thick for that. Glistening strands of it hung, mucus-like from the ceiling. A tiny figure stood at the edge of the weird pool, looking doubtfully into it. Careless of whatever dangers might have been lurking in the shadows, I threw open my arms and I ran to her. "Kylie!" "Hi, Daddy." My daughter smiled. She didn't seem hurt, not physically at least. I asked her what she was doing here. "Oh, the man in the woods said that I should go for a swim. He says that if I do, I'll be able to fly and talk to animals just like him." What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How? "Oh, I don't know. Why don't you ask him yourself? He's standing right behind you." At that moment, the flame of my lighter went out. I hugged Kylie to my chest and fled back the way that I had come. I hoped at least. My foot slipped on a loose rock and I crashed headfirst into something that was cold, slimy, and taller than me. There was an awful inhuman chittering noise. 6 long fingers grazed my hair as they grabbed for my head. Kylie screamed and I dragged us forward along the cave floor, ignoring the spiders skittering through my hair and down the back of my shirt. The man in the woods, whatever it was, strode slowly behind us, taking its time, enjoying this. There was a light up ahead, but that didn't make any sense. Even if we had made it further than I thought, we still shouldn't have been anywhere near the cave entrance. The light bobbed closer and shone on our faces. It was a flashlight. Its beam flickered up to the thing hovering over us. "Stay down and keep moving," Maddie Corvin shouted. The boom of her echoed deafeningly from the cave walls, but in the glow of her flashlight, the path to the exit was clear. There was movement behind us, a lot of movement, as though dozens of child-sized things were scurrying across the cobweb ceiling. Maddie kept firing, and Kylie and I kept running. I set my daughter down as soon as we were free of the cavern. To my surprise, I could see the creek and even the cars from where we stood, less than a half a mile away. It was as though whatever disorienting power permeated the place had faded, at least for now. Moments later, Ranger Corvin backed out of the cave, her pistol still aimed into the gloom. "Did you get it?" I whispered. "I don't know," Maddie answered truthfully. "But I'm not budging from this spot until I'm sure you folks are safe. Get back to your wife and get out of here." With Kylie on my shoulders, I staggered back through the ferns. My eyes swept the ground for snakes, but like the 6 tape-marked trees and creepy dolls, the rattlers were suddenly nowhere to be found. At the edge of the creek, I spotted something shiny lying in the mud. My car keys. Heather sat up in the back of Ranger Corvin's cruiser as we approached. "You're back so soon," she called out. "How on earth did you find Kylie so fast?" From Heather's perspective, I had been only gone for a few minutes. For me and Ranger Corvin, however, it felt like half a day had passed. I wondered what Maddie would find when and if she made it out of those woods. My wife's eyes grew wide as she heard 3 gunshots from the ridge above. There was something desperate about the sound that spurred me into action. Ranger Corvin needed help, and we were the only ones who could get it for her. "I told you this was a bad place," Kylie sniffled, wiping at the cave dirt on her face. Heather clipped her into her car seat as I pulled out of the gravel turnoff and raced back down the 2-lane road to a small gas station that I spotted near the entrance of the park. Leaving the engine running, I dashed inside. A dusty bell jingled above the door. The place was a 4-pump store that sold overpriced drinks and firewood to tourists while locals stopped in for bait and coffee. The woman behind the counter dropped a pot of it when she saw me come running in. For Maddie Corvin, almost 50 years had passed, but she had recognized me right away. Her Forest Service uniform had been replaced with a yellow gas station polo shirt, and her hair had gone gray. But her bright green eyes had lost none of their sharpness. I had no doubt that the woman at the cash register was the same person who had saved my daughter and I from certain death only hours before. "You," she grunted in a voice roughened by years of booze and cigarettes. I always wondered if you would ever come walking through that door. After what happened, it's the only reason that I stuck around here." When Maddie had emerged from the woods back in 1975, raving about missing children and missing time, there had been no proof to back up her claims. My family and I were nowhere to be found, and she wasn't able to locate the cave or the grotesque dolls again. The Park Service let her go less than a month later, citing mental health concerns. She had worked here at the gas station ever since, listening to the tales the locals told about odd animal behavior and unexplained sightings at the gravel turnoff by the creek. "I warn the tourists about the place. I tell them that there's a dangerous bear in the area. It's easier than the truth, and who knows, maybe some of them will listen." Out in the car, Kylie was getting antsy, squirming and kicking in her car seat. She had been through so much. I made a point to grab a few of her favorite snacks from the gas station shelves, but when I went to pay, Maddie waved me away. "It's on the house." The ex-ranger smirked. "I don't know how to thank you." "Oh, forget about it. It's ancient history. You really want to thank me? Spread the word. Let people know that if they notice kids or animals acting strange in the woods, it might be the only warning that they get." I promised that I would. She waved as we pulled out of the parking lot, standing just as tall and strong as she had been in the moment that we met. I hoped that whatever was lurking among the tall trees behind the gas station would allow her to live out the rest of her days in peace. I hoped, too, that I wasn't taking a part of it out of the park with me, and Kylie was munching contently on a chocolate donut in the back seat. But when I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her bright green eyes flashed up to meet my own. "Keep driving, Daddy," her voice said inside my head. "Keep driving and act like you don't know." When the current administration started cutting National Park Service jobs, my old post at the Everglades abruptly ended. They sacked almost everyone, leaving us with barely enough severance to cover the next month. I was surprised. I was pissed. I was devastated. But my supervisor had already lined up another gig, and he was able to bring one more law enforcement ranger with him. A week after my dismissal, he called and asked if I wanted to go out for a cup of joe. "You've always been there for me, no matter the situation," Bruce said over a steaming mug of black coffee. My supervisor was a bear of a man, a bushy beard, 6'5", 240, built like a lumberjack. I trusted him like a brother. "And there's nothing more important in this line of work than loyalty, and out of all the rangers at that godforsaken swamp, you were the most devoted." "Thank you," I said, unsure of where this was going. Sensing my impatience, Bruce launched into his offer. "Look, I've got some friends in the Bureau of Land Management. There's this wildlife preserve. It's contract work, 6 months, but there's an opportunity for extension." "Are you?" "Yes, I am," Bruce said. "You good to move to Northern California?" I didn't have anything tying me to South Florida at the time, but the distance caught me off guard. This was clear across the country, and I wanted to know where I'd be spending the better half of the year. "Is it Golden Gate?" Visions of the majestic San Francisco Bay flashed before my eyes. "The location's classified," Bruce said. "It's not a park with visitors." "Oh, that sounded ominous. Is it military?" "Look, all I can tell you right now is that it's easy work. The easiest job you've ever had. Oh, and the pay is triple what you made in the Glades." "Yeah, sounds great," I said. "It's probably in the Bay Area," I thought. "The cost of living there is much higher." Bruce slid a nondescript manila folder across the table. I reached out to open it, but he kept his meaty hand flat atop its cover. There's just one thing I need to know before we go any further. I leaned back, suddenly aware of how quiet the coffee shop had grown. Is it some kind of drug thing? I whispered. I knew a lot about grow operations up in Northern California. Bruce fixed me with a steely gaze. Meth, he said. And I spit up my cappuccino. Whoa, I don't know. But Bruce erupted into a rumbling laugh that was part growl. I'm just messing with you, dude. The site's restricted due to environmental concerns, and you just have to sign an NDA before I tell you anything else. Oh, I let out a sigh and opened the folder to an 80-page document of boilerplate legalese. My new post was a wildlife preserve called McNeely Pines. I arrived a few days after signing my NDA. I flew out to Sacramento and then drove for a few hours through winding mountainous roads with nary a ton or gas station in sight. I left all traces of civilization far behind and entered the pure, untrammeled wilderness of our westward settlers centuries ago. The sun had just set when I finally arrived at the ranger station. It was an old timber-built hunting lodge that was repurposed by the government. 2 stories tall with a series of radio antennas sprouting from its roof. There was something off about the place, but it took me a while to realize what. It wasn't until after that I had moved into my room upstairs, taken a nice hot shower, and settled into bed that I noticed. All the windows were reinforced with metal bars. Bruce gave me a tour of the property the next day. It was just the 2 of us working the park. Cell reception was spotty, but we had a high-tech comms room in the station for communicating with the outside world if needed. The preserve encompassed 10,000 acres of mountainous forest, full of towering pines whose expansive canopies blocked out most of the sunlight, even in the middle of the day. The forest, it looked pristine. No trash, no roads, plenty of wildlife, but it was inaccessible. A 15-foot tall chain-link fence topped with razor wire surrounded the whole area. No one was allowed inside except with express permission from the federal government. Before my arrival, Bruce said the location of the preserve had been quarantined, but I never imagined it would be like this. What do they have in there? Mutant grizzly bears? I asked as the 2 of us drove along the perimeter and a park-issued ATV. Deer mostly, Bruce said. It's not just to keep the animals in, but also to keep people out. Now that I was on site, my supervisor could explain the whole situation. Apparently, a railway runs through the McNeely Forest Wildlife Preserve. It's shut down now, but for decades it serviced freight trains. Most carried simple goods, foodstuffs, lumber, sheet metal, but occasionally they transported hazardous materials. One such train was carrying over 200 tons of toxic chemicals, and when it derailed in the middle of the forest 5 years ago, the resulting spill covered much of the land. Fortunately, there was no civilization nearby, so the story didn't garner much news outside of a few small articles in the local newspapers. After the initial cleanup operation, the EPA ordered a quarantine of the whole forest for at least 20 years, subject to further restrictions if testing didn't improve. Our job's making sure that no one except the EPA enters or leaves the forest, Bruce said. The fencing had one gate located next to the ranger station. Bruce and I were the only ones with the code to open it. Bruce was right. The job was easy. Outside of handling the main gate, I managed a series of trail cameras placed every 100 meters or so along the perimeter fence. The cameras faced both inside and outside the preserve. If I caught anybody trying to break through the fence, I was to arrest them on sight. That was it. The government covered lodging and delivered free groceries every other week, so I was raking in pure profit for almost no work. It was perfect. But still, that left me with a lot of questions. Why did we need so many trail cams? There were literally hundreds watching every inch of the park. I had never seen so many before, even at larger parks. And this was on top of the daily patrols that Bruce and I made in the park ATVs. Furthermore, when I first checked the cameras, I noticed the fencing had odd markings. Nothing major, just this faint script. You could only see it when you were right up against it. There were these little scribbles etched into the metal chain links. It looked like some kind of writing, but I couldn't make out any of it. I asked Bruce about it one night. He said that the etchings were a company signature. The Park Service hired a special company to make the fence extra strong and resilient against the elements, anti-rust and whatnot. Jesus, they've spent a fortune on this quarantine operation, I thought. Each evening, I would upload all the footage from the trail cams and review it for any anomalies. The cameras only captured images if there was movement in the frame, so most of it showed branches swaying in the wind or a squirrel running up by the lens. Occasionally, a deer or raccoon would approach the fence from within the quarantine zone. The preserve had a surprising amount of wildlife given its toxic backstory, though the animals never appeared to look or act abnormal. With all the hazardous stuff in there, it's a miracle that anything's alive. I told Bruce one night as we drank whiskey and watched old episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond. The lodge didn't have internet access, but it came with an expansive collection of DVDs. I don't know, life's pretty resilient, I guess, he said, no matter what the world puts it through. What we put it through, I said, referring to the toxic spill. Bruce nodded. Still have to put him down if any manage to break through the fencing. Yeah, I said. I didn't relish the thought of shooting a mutant deer. The first couple of months were monotonous, checking trail cams, maintaining the ATVs, watching too many episodes of Friends, and every so often letting EPA officials through the main gate. Each week, 2 black SUVs would arrive at the station, and a half-dozen men and women in pristine white hazmat suits would pile out, carrying nondescript equipment boxes. They weren't much for conversation. Just running more tests, one of them said. It was the longest sentence that any of them had ever spoken to me. I would input my gate code and the group would disappear into the seemingly endless forest. Sometimes for 30 minutes, sometimes a whole day. Neither Bruce nor I ever accompanied them. What if they need protection? I asked him, thinking about potential animal attacks. They can handle themselves, Bruce replied. The hazmats are enough. I suddenly became aware that neither of us had worn so much as a face mask while patrolling the forest for hours each day. And here were these people in full body suits. Should we be wearing anything? Nah, the spill site's far, far in the interior, Bruce said. We're well outside the range of anything dangerous. That's what they tell us, at least, I said, chuckling. Yeah, true, Bruce laughed. What do you think they do in there for so long? I don't know, soil samples, a bonfire rager. Who cares so long as our check's clear? Bruce said. I nodded, but something still felt off. The EPA officials were so deadly serious whenever they had arrived, and they always seemed dazed when they returned from their testing. It was like they had been through the ringer in there. Their blank, expressionless faces reminded me of someone in shock. One day I noticed a syrupy red liquid leaking from one of their equipment boxes as they exited. I almost asked what it was, but the officials quickly scrambled back into their SUVs and waved goodbye before driving off. It has to be blood, I told Bruce later that night. There's nothing else that it could be. Are they killing animals in there and bringing them back to some lab for testing? Look, Bruce set his whiskey down. It's best if you don't dwell on it that much. His demeanor suddenly changed, as if I were bringing up a taboo subject, but this was our job. Don't you want to know what's going on? I asked. I mean, the cleanup's the whole point of this place. Quarantine, clean up the mess, reopen the park to the public. I never said the park would reopen to the public, Bruce said. What? My supervisor just stared at the flames in the lodge's fireplace. The logs popped and crackled, and then he downed the rest of his whiskey and started up the stairs. I'm going to bed. Make sure you put the fire out before heading up. I had known Bruce for years, but I had never seen him like this. Everything was hunky-dory for weeks. We were cracking jokes about toxic deer with superpowers, but the moment that I brought up that blood-soaked equipment container, it was like I had touched a raw nerve. He became standoffish, even a bit sad. At first, I thought my hypothesis was correct, and he was angry about the EPA killing animals for testing. But Bruce was never much of an animal lover. Heck, he ate beef almost every day, so he couldn't be that upset. It had to be something else. Something that he wasn't telling me, wouldn't tell me, or maybe I was overthinking things. And there's only so much to occupy your mind in the middle of nowhere. Only so many old TV episodes to watch. So many dusty books on wilderness exploration to read. My job was monotonous, repetitive. In such situations, the mind tends to search for meaning, especially when there's a mystery this intriguing. I started my investigation in the comms room. As I mentioned earlier, a big part of my job was reviewing trail camera footage, which I uploaded to a bulky government-issued desktop computer. I was only supposed to review the previous day's footage, but after some digging, I found a folder containing the trail cam archives. There was footage going back to the establishment of the quarantine zone, years before I had arrived. I started with the earliest images. There were no signs of a train crash or fire, but some of the nighttime footage showed human figures staggering out of the forest. They appeared bruised and bloodied. Walking in a daze, there were only a couple of them at first, but that number soon expanded to 6, and then a dozen, and then dozens. What are you doing? I minimized the screen and spun around in my office chair. Bruce had entered the comms room. Re-reviewing footage from last night. It's 6:30, time for evening rounds, Bruce said. Oh, right, yeah. I closed out of everything and logged off the computer. Bruce stared at me as I left the room. He knows something's up, I thought. He'll see that I accessed those early files. I wanted to say something, but I figured I would ask Bruce about the footage later that night after he had his nightly whiskeys. Maybe that would finally get him talking. When I entered the garage to get the ATV, I noticed a massive pair of bolt cutters hanging from a tool shelf nearby. Bruce said that they were for EPA emergencies only, such as if the gate wouldn't open, and we needed to cut an exit for the hazmats. I had never taken the cutters with me on patrol before. What would be the point? I wasn't going to rescue some mutant deer dying from toxic shock. But that night, I don't know what it was, but something compelled me to grab the tools before heading out. They were heavy, much heavier than normal bolt cutters. I noticed they bore the same odd scribbles as the chain link fence. After grabbing the cutters, I hopped in the ATV. My patrol was to drive the entire park perimeter and check for anything suspicious. There was a service road that ran alongside all 14 miles of fencing. I flipped on the ATV's headlamps. The sun was about to set and the whole forest was covered in a thick blue gloom. Not quite daylight, not quite night. A half-light. I drove along the service road at 10 miles per hour, scanning the area as I went. The air felt thick. The forest sounds were muffled, almost as if everything was underwater. It was an eerie atmosphere unlike anything that I had felt since arriving at McNeely Pines. I soon found out why. Halfway through my patrol, I heard a voice call out, "Help!" I stopped the ATV, shining a spotlight around the service road. "Hello, who's there? Help, please!" The voice was coming from within the fence. I turned my spotlight to reveal a gaunt figure amid the tall pines. It was a man mid-40s and skeletal. Ragged clothes barely clung to his emaciated frame. He looked shocked and confused as he staggered towards the fence. "Help me." "My God," I whispered. I got out of the ATV, my hand in the holster of a taser gun. The man looked like a meth addict that I had encountered in the Everglades once. Unpredictable and much stronger than normal. "How did you get in there? This forest is restricted." "They're keeping us," the man said. His skin was so sallow and pale that it almost glowed. "We can't leave. They're horrible, oh God, they're horrible." "Who's keeping you?" "The demons," the man said. Drool spilled from his lips. "Demons everywhere." "Stay right there," I said. "I'm going to get you help." I returned to the ATV and clicked on my shoulder-mounted radio. "Bruce, come in. I'm at mile marker 12. There's a man inside the fence. Says that he's being held prisoner. Looks like he might be on something." "Keep him there, but don't engage," Bruce said. "Don't talk to him and don't even look at him. I'm coming to assist." "Copy that." "Who's that? Who are you talking to? Don't let him come here." The man had walked up to the fence, almost close enough to touch it. "Sir, it's going to be okay," I said. "What's your name?" "They don't give us names. Only numbers." "Okay, look, just remain calm, okay? Help is on the way." "No, that man won't help. He'll kill us." I sighed. There was no use in arguing with this madman. He's probably some druggy backpacker who wandered a bit too far off the trail and somehow climbed over or dug his way under the fence. Hopefully he didn't have any exposure to the chemicals. I made sure to keep my distance. "We're not supposed to leave the facility or the demons will punish us," the man said. "The demons in white." "Uh-huh," I said, staring at my phone. The ranger station was roughly 6 miles away. It would take Bruce less than half an hour to arrive after he had started up the auxiliary ATV. "Please, sir, you have a kind face," the man said. "I know you'll help us. What's your name?" "Us." I looked up to see 2 more emaciated people standing beside the gaunt man. One was a woman in her early 20s, and the other was a scared little girl no more than 6 years old. "Help us, please," she cried. Tears stained her cheeks. With all 3 of them there, I realized that they were wearing similar outfits. Plain beige shirts with matching beige slacks. They didn't even have shoes, only cheap flip-flops, like the kind you would wear to a public shower. "Jesus Christ," I said. This was not just some random tweaker, this was something more serious. "Where did you all come from?" "From the facility," the woman said. "What facility?" "We just want to go home." It was the little girl. "Please, sir." She held out her tiny arm. A small, homemade bracelet hung from her bony wrist, just a piece of string with a few buttons as ornaments. "Are you all together?" "We're a family," the gaunt man said, pulling the woman and child close. "Just don't engage them in any way," Bruce said. "I'll be there as soon as I can." He sounded out of breath. I heard a faint buzzing sound. Was that the ATV engine? "Bruce, you still there?" The radio only crackled in response. Forget it. He's not going to help us." The woman tugged on the man's shirt, pulling him away from the fence. "No, I can see the empathy in his face." The man fought to remain where he was. He kept staring at me, and I could feel his bloodshot eyes boring into me even as I looked down at my cell phone. It was 8:15 p.m. What was taking Bruce so long? A sudden gurgling sound drew my attention, and then a woman's scream. I looked up. The little girl had collapsed onto the leafy ground, seizing. Her eyes rolled back as she struggled to breathe. "No, she's going into shock." The woman grabbed a stick from the ground and shoved it in the girl's mouth. Drool spilled from her lips. "She's going to die." The man looked at me pleading. "Do you have a first aid kit?" I did. A part of me wanted to radio Bruce one more time, but the girl's condition was getting worse by the second. Her tiny body racked with violent convulsions. I needed to act now. I rushed into the back seat of the ATV, grabbing the first aid kit and some bolt cutters. Seconds later, I knelt beside the fencing and started to cut. "Oh, thank you, thank you." Snip. I cut the last chain link and a large section of the fence fell away. As soon as I did it, an incredible whoosh of air radiated outward. It was a shockwave that knocked me flat on my butt. My head spun, my consciousness flickered like a static TV signal. But in those fleeting moments of lucidity, I saw the family rush through the opening. "We're forever in your debt," the man said before he and his family disappeared into the gloomy woods beyond. I vaguely remember more figures running through the exit afterward. A throng of pale, long-limbed bodies with scythe-like fingers. And then everything went dark. I awoke in the dirt late the following morning. My mouth was dry and my head was groggy. What? I was still lying beside the fence, which now had a gaping hole. The section that I had cut open was pushed outward as if something massive had squeezed through the gap. I got up. My ATV was still there, but it was dead. The battery juice ran out from running the headlamps all night, and all the gas had burned away. I clicked my shoulder-mounted radio. "Bruce, come in, Bruce." There was no response. Where the heck is he? I ended up walking back to the ranger station. I kept radioing my supervisor every few minutes, but only received errant static in response. I knew that something had gone terribly wrong, and my decision to cut open that fence was almost certainly the cause of it. Who were those people asking for my help last night? What was the facility that they kept talking about? Were they all on something? Was I on something? Was the whole night some toxic-fueled hallucination brought on by the chemicals in the forest? All I knew for sure was that I had messed up, big time. I'd probably lose my job over this, I thought. When I finally arrived back at the lodge, the front door was ajar, and a few of the windows had been broken open. The iron bars covering them were pulled apart. Only somebody powerful could do that. Someone or something. There was an awful stench in the air. Flies buzzed everywhere. I pulled out my service revolver and stepped inside. The place was a war zone. Furniture ripped up, glassware shattered, tables and desks overturned, and blood splattered everywhere. In the center of the room was all that remained of Bruce. His body had been torn open, limbs severed, chest cavity ripped apart. Something had eaten his internal organs while he was still alive. My former supervisor's face was frozen mid-scream, his glassy eyes wide with terror. I staggered backward, bile rising up in my throat. This was all too much. But it was about to get much, much worse. That's when I saw what Bruce clutched in his cold, dead hands. A blood-stained government report, highly classified. After grabbing some pliers from the tool shed, I pried open his rigor mortis stiffened fingers to access the document. Its contents were somehow more sickening than the carnage that surrounded me. There was no train crash. That was all a cover story to quarantine the area and keep any hunters or tourists out of the woods. The EPA agents that I let inside the fence each week were military scientists. They worked at a top-secret research facility deep within McNeely Pines. It didn't even have a name. The report only listed it as the facility. The document had numerous grainy black and white photos. They showed men, women, and even children in barren cells, heads shaved, emaciated, and terrified. There were pages of data detailing horrific experiments, tests involving exposure to experimental neurotoxins. The scientists would monitor each person's degradation to learn just how long it took for somebody to go blind, for their teeth to fall out, for their heart to stop. I threw the document across the room in disgust. And that's when I saw the shredder. A pile of chewed up pages lay beneath it. There must have been dozens of documents all cut to ribbons, more evidence of the facility. After searching the rest of the lodge, I realized that the report that I had thrown across the room, the one that Bruce had clutched as he died, was the last bit of hard evidence of the facility left. He had destroyed everything else. That was the buzzing sound that I heard last night. I went over and picked up the bloodstained document, placing it in my satchel. And then I left the McNeely Pines for good. I drove all night until I found a cheap roadside motel near Yosemite. Once secured in my room, I pulled out the document and photographed each page, uploading them to my Google Drive in case somebody burst through the door right then and shot me dead and burned the document. I needed to make sure that this last bit of evidence would remain. As I finally read through the entire report, I noticed that the military had moved on from chemical weapons to arcane ones. The last pages detailed a program involving an ancient Sumerian tablet. There were images of odd scribbles, the same writing etched on the chain-link fencing and bolt cutters. The scientists had performed some sort of blood ritual on one of their subjects, a man in his mid-40s. A grainy black and white photo showed his face. It was the same man who came to me the other night, begging to be let out. The document's last page detailed a procedure where they drained all of this man's blood into a basin, made according to ancient specifications. According to the report, a figure rose from the bloody pool an hour later. It was tall and gaunt and incredibly strong. I'm in that motel room now, debating whether or not to release the full document to the press. It will have to be soon. It won't take long for the government to realize who let their precious assets loose. I wish I could say that I regret what I did. Those things will likely wreak havoc once they find civilization. There will be more casualties, perhaps even innocent ones. But I can't get the images of that frightened family out of my head pleading for help. No matter what, I know there's still some humanity left inside them. As I drove away from McNeely Pines, I saw one in its true form. 10 feet tall, long-limbed and hairless, with skin like a shark's hide. It smiled at me in recognition, flashing a mouthful of dagger teeth. And then it waved as I drove past. A tiny bracelet hung from its wrist, a string with a few buttons. I'm a park ranger out in Nevada. There is an old abandoned mining town that's set a ways off the main road. The Park Service had claimed it a while back, but people were not encouraged to visit there. In fact, it was plainly marked with signs that said, "Off limits, no trespassing, danger." Heck, about the only thing they didn't do was build a moat around the place. Sometimes I wonder if they should. Some people need to learn to read or listen, one of the two, because it seemed like I was always chasing people out of there. They would look at me like I was crazy, but every one of them would spray gravel as they hauled it after I would tell them the story. I'm not supposed to tell the story. I've been warned many times, even threatened with much worse than the unemployment line. I guess maybe I need to learn to listen too, because it was the best way to make sure people left and never came back. I'm tired of being told to keep my mouth shut. I'm tired that nothing's been done about it. We rangers are supposed to just go about our jobs and pretend that it never happened. Well, I believe that's the best and quickest way for it to happen again, and I never want it to happen again. It was a while ago. That's my way of saying that I forgot how long ago it was, but the memory's still fresh enough to tell. It was back when even I was unsure why the town was off limits. I had heard old wives' tales and urban legends, but no one would ever commit to anything concrete. I asked around once and was told that I was better off not knowing. The old rangers would just tell me to mind my business and to stay out of town. But something about it always intrigued me. I was never good at blindly following orders, so as often as I could, I would find some excuse to drive past it. On that day, it was a good thing I did, or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. I noticed a small mobile home parked at the edge of town. I knew that it hadn't been there the day before. I pulled up behind it and got out of my truck. I scanned the area around and didn't see anything moving that the wind wasn't blowing. I walked around the vehicle and it seemed to be in good shape. None of the tires were flat. There seemed to be no good reason for them sitting there unless they were sightseeing. I peeked in the windshield, but I couldn't see anyone, so I went to the side door and knocked. "Park ranger," I said. "Anybody in there?" The wind whistling was my only answer. I knocked again. "Park ranger, is everyone all right?" No answer. I pulled on the door latch and it opened. "Coming in," I said. "Just need to check to make sure that everyone's okay." I pulled the door open and I stepped inside. Unconsciously, I rested my hand on my sidearm. I closed the door behind me, leaving the wind outside. I looked around the camper and found plenty of food and supplies. They seemed to be well stocked up for the trip. I stepped back toward the bedroom, keeping an ear open for anything. It was eerily silent. The only thing that I could hear was the sound of my boots on the linoleum as I headed back the short hallway. It wasn't a long walk until I got there. The bedroom was clean and the bed had been made. I opened a few drawers and found clothes for a man and a woman. There was no sign of a struggle, so I went back out to the kitchen, stopped to open the bathroom door and found 2 kids' toothbrushes and toothpaste sitting on the sink. Just like the bedroom, everything seemed to be in its place. I noticed that the hand towel holder was empty. I looked on the floor to see if it had fallen, but the towel was just gone. I shrugged it off and I went back out to the kitchen. The table was still folded down into a bed, as these smaller models were known for. Scanning around, I was hard-pressed to find anything out of the ordinary, except for the fact that no one was there. I stepped outside and the sun had disappeared. It would be dark soon. I looked around, but I didn't see anyone. It was as if they had parked the camper at the edge of town and went for a walk. I stepped out of the camper and I turned to close the door. And that was when I saw it. A small red dot on the step. I leaned closer and it looked like it could be dried blood. I tried to dismiss it as nothing. People drip blood every day for simple, non-threatening reasons. Nosebleeds, small cuts, general accidents. It could be absolutely nothing. But when you add in a missing family at the edge of an abandoned town that's supposed to be off limits, normal things don't look so normal. I didn't touch it in case it needed to be tested later for a DNA sample. And there it was. I was already starting to look at this as a crime scene. I looked down at the ground and I saw my boot prints in the dirt leading up to the camper. I also saw other tracks. There was another set of adult boot prints, a set of adult sneakers, and 2 different sets of smaller sneakers. Those were spooky but comforting. At least I knew these people were here somewhere. They hadn't just vanished from inside of the camper. No, it was the other footprints that gave me chills. They were adult-sized and it looked like there was more than one of them. But the creepy thing about them was that they were bare feet. I couldn't imagine anybody who lived in the area being stupid enough to walk around the desert in their bare feet. Aside from the different types of scorpions, you also had to worry about snakes, spiders, and lizards, just to name a few. It was becoming more likely that I would find this family dead from stupidity. I followed the barefoot tracks and they seemed to lead around the corner of the camper. In fact, they did several laps around the camper, with frequent stops where the feet were pointed toward the camper as if looking inside. That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. This family had been stalked. I stepped in a wider circle so I wouldn't disturb the footprints. It became more apparent by the minute that this was a crime scene. I pulled on my radio to call on my position and request backup or police, but my radio was strangely silent. It didn't even click when I had released the talk button. The light was lit so I knew the battery was charged, it just wasn't transmitting. The smart thing to do just then would have been to get in my truck and drive to the station to report what was happening. I took one step toward the truck, and that's when I heard the scream. It was a woman's scream, high and piercing, a scream of pain and anguish, as if her whole world had come crashing down. My fight or flight kicked in and there wasn't an ounce of flight in it. In a heartbeat, my gun was in my hand. I turned toward the town and began following the footprints. Once they were done circling the camper, they headed straight into town. Dusk had faded and taken the light with it. I pulled my flashlight off my belt and used it to guide me on my trail. There were a half-dozen buildings, all in some level of decay. I was worried about stepping into one and just collapsing on top of me. That aside from the chance of meeting a scorpion or some other creature that didn't appreciate being disturbed in their territory. The wind had died down and the air was still. It was so quiet that I could hear my own footsteps. And there was something else too. I felt a vibration in the air. At the time, I thought it was just my heightened senses at the prospect of meeting up with a dangerous person who may have harmed that family. Even though everything within me was demanding that I run towards the scream that I had heard, my steps were slow and measured. I needed more input. I needed to know how many people that I was dealing with. I needed to identify threats and I would be able to deal with this without becoming a victim myself. As I approached the first building, I had a strong feeling of being watched. Stepping on the porch made the boards creak threateningly. I didn't want this to end with a broken ankle or worse. I tested the boards before putting full weight on them and slowly approached the broken windows. I shone my light inside. I panned around slowly, finding a bunch of old boxes and general junk with the odd wooden chair and table. I was about to move on when back in the far corner, I saw a pair of eyes lit up by my flashlight. I froze. My light locked on it. The eyes seemed to be locked on the light as well. I couldn't tell what it was, but it scared the heck out of me. I suddenly thought of the movie that I had recently seen, Jurassic Park. When the actor was explaining how raptors attack, how one will draw your attention while two more sneak up on you and attack from the side. I suddenly felt very vulnerable, as if someone was sneaking up behind me. I whipped around, pointing with my gun and flashlight, my eyes darting all around, but I couldn't see anything. I shone my light back inside, but the eyes were gone. This didn't comfort me. In fact, it did the opposite. I was in a panic. I felt like I was surrounded and they were toying with me. I didn't even know who they were. I took a few deep breaths to get myself under control. I knew that panic led to bad decisions, and I couldn't afford any bad decisions out here on my own. I shone my light back toward the camper and saw a shadow dart out of the light. I knew that it was all or nothing. There was no backing out. I was being hunted, just like that family had been. I didn't know what was hunting me, but it didn't matter. Whoever or whatever, it was dangerous. Focus, I told myself. Stay on your toes, remember your training. Even though my training also said, don't get yourself in a bad situation, it was already too late for that. Something was near the camper. I still had no idea if this family was dead or alive. The only things that I had to go on were mysterious footprints and a scream. It was the stuff of every horror movie ever made. I just hoped that I didn't end up as one of the victims that died a horrible death to save some stupid teenagers who had risked their own lives by blundering into something that they should have left alone. I sighed, turned my light back to the ground, and I followed the footprints. I noticed for the first time that there were other marks among them. They had been walked over and obscured, but it looked like two long lines, like somebody was being dragged. I brought my flashlight back up just in time to see a set of eyes disappear behind a building on the other side of the street. I stepped up to the next building and shone my light inside to find much the same as the first, minus the eyes. I didn't linger long before turning my light back out to the streets and the other buildings. I felt like it somehow kept them at bay, as if they would work their way closer to me if I didn't shine the light their way. I didn't know how long this would last. I continued to the next building, with a larger building looming larger at the end of the street. It looked like it was an old church. There was the rough shape of a steeple that had partially collapsed. I turned and flashed my light back to the street to keep the hunters back. When I stepped up to the window of the next building and shone my light inside, I found bones. Piles of bones. Most looked like they were from smaller animals, but there were larger ones interspersed with them. I was sure that I had spotted a couple of human femurs. I tried my radio again, but it still wasn't working. The vibration in the air was getting stronger. It was oppressive, like the pressure you feel when you're underwater. The stillness in the air had magnified any sound. I could hear the footsteps of somebody behind me, but when I turned, I couldn't see anyone. I left the bone storage building and headed for the last building at the end of the street, the church. I walked up to the doors and they were very plain. 2 wooden doors, no Gothic architecture, no cross. Just a couple of wooden doors that looked like they were about to fall off their hinges. I hesitated, turned, and looked back down the street. I knew they were there, but I couldn't see them. This was where they had been hurting me all along. I held my gun and flashlight at the ready, knowing that I was in for a fight as soon as the doors had opened. I took a deep and cleansing breath, and then I shoved the doors open. I shone my light all around, my eyes darting into all the dark corners, except they weren't dark. There were candles lit all around. It was quite beautiful. It was also quite empty. There was no one there. Even empty and well lit, it gave off a creepy vibe. I mean, why do empty churches always do that? You would think that it would be the opposite. My senses went on high alert. I didn't trust it. It had to be a trap. As I continued to scan back and forth, looking for any hiding spots among the pews, I noticed that there was one person there, in the first pew, bent over so I could barely see them. I slowly made my way forward, head on a swivel as I approached the lone figure. When I was nearly there, it looked like they were barely breathing. I came around in front of the creature and I aimed my gun. She looked up at me. She was naked and her hands and mouth were bound. As soon as she saw me, she started screaming into the gag in her mouth. She was screaming so hard that her face had turned red. I reached down and slid the gag out of her mouth. "It's a trap," she screamed. I looked up and saw my worst nightmare. There were creatures, dozens of them. Each one looked vaguely human, but they were deformed. There was one that had one healthy arm and a second that was shriveled up. One had only a single leg but still managed to hop toward me. Another had no legs but used its arms to crawl on the floor. None of them had a full set of teeth, but they all had a look of hunger and rage in their eyes. They came from everywhere. Some even crawled their way down from hiding places in the ceiling, like some horrific Spider-Man. They swarmed toward the front of the church. I looked around for anywhere to go, anywhere to hide, when I locked eyes on a door that looked like it was a closet. "Come on," I said, grabbing her arm and dragging her over to the door. "No, I can't, please don't make me," she said, tugging against me. "We go in here or we die," I said, cutting the ropes around her wrists and putting my jacket over her shoulders. She reluctantly came along with me as the horde of creatures were nearly on us. "Quick," I said, opening the door and shoving her through. I slammed it shut behind me, taking out my knife and jamming it into the wooden door frame to keep it shut. I turned and nearly ran her over. She hadn't moved. She was standing there staring into the dark. I shone my flashlight in front of us and saw a rickety staircase descending into the darkness. "Please don't make me go down there," she whimpered. "We don't have a choice," I said. "They'll be through this door soon." The pounding had gotten louder. She turned toward the door and then pulled my jacket closer around her and took a deep breath. I stepped around her and led the way, shining my flashlight all around, trying to make sure that we wouldn't run into any surprises. The boards creaked menacingly with every step that I took. I couldn't see what was underneath, but I had no desire to find out the fast way. I looked back and she was still staring down. I held my hand out and she slowly took one step and then another. Her bare feet were filthy. I wondered if she was getting splinters as she took each step slowly and gingerly, as if walking on hot coals. After she had taken a few steps, I turned back to guide her way. The stairway was long and attached to an uneven stone wall. At some points, it jutted out far enough that I had to squeeze around to get to the next step. It was getting colder as we descended. I started missing my jacket, but knew that she needed it more. The spiderwebs weren't helping my anxiety either. I wondered if they were made by the deadly breed. I glanced back and saw that she was still working her way down the stairs. When I looked forward again, there was a creature coming up the stairs toward me. I didn't think, I just reacted. I barely had the gun even pointed until I fired. The creature fell back with shock frozen on its face and tumbled down the stairs. I instantly regretted my action, as my ears were already ringing from the gunshots in such an enclosed place. I turned around to check on her, but she was curled up in the fetal position sitting on a step, ears covered and rocking back and forth. Hey, it's okay, I tried to say, but my voice sounded strange. I guess temporary deafness will do that. At least I hoped it was temporary. She didn't look at me. I wasn't sure if she had heard me, so I touched her shoulder and she immediately recoiled and climbed several stairs, backing away. I bent down to her. Look, I know you're scared. I mean, I would be too. But if we're going to get out of this, we have to do it together. If I'm going to have to check on you every few steps, we'll be helpless if another one of those things attacks. I don't want to go down there, she stammered. I looked ahead and then back at her. We have no choice. I turned and started down the stairs again. After around a dozen steps, I turned to see that she had stood and was slowly making her way down again. I kept going until I made it to the bottom and kicked the body of the creature out of the way. I looked around, but there wasn't much to see. It was a passageway made of these same rough-cut rock walls and a dirt floor. I turned to see her make it to the last step. Her eyes were wide with fear. I could only imagine what she had already been through. She looked away as she stepped past the body. I decided to make a little conversation as we walked down the endless passageway to get her to focus on something other than our situation. You're from the camper, aren't you? I said. She nodded absently as she stared at the floor. Were you going on vacation? Another nod. I saw the kids' toothbrushes in the bathroom sink. How many kids do you have? Her eyes glazed over. 2 boys. And your husband is with you. She nodded. Where were you headed? Vegas. What made you stop here? The kids wanted to see the abandoned town. Tears streamed down her dirty cheeks, making lines on her face. Would you like me to stop talking? She nodded. We continued forward in silence. The chill of the place made me shiver, but not just because of the temperature. The thought of being attacked at any moment was more than keeping me on my toes. It was wearing on my nerves. After some distance, we came to an opening that stretched out into a full room. She stopped and stared. I was puzzled at first until I noticed the smell. It was the stench of death. I shone my light around the room. The first corner that I came to held a pile of bones. There was no denying that these ones were human. They were large and the right shape. There were even a couple of full torsos still together that hadn't deteriorated yet. In the next corner, there were 3 bodies hanging from the dirt ceiling. It looked like a man and 2 boys. They had been strung up by their arms and they were covered in blood. There were innumerable cuts and puncture wounds, but the most horrid sight were the many bites that were taken out of them. She collapsed and began to sob. I knew right away that this was her family. I'm so sorry, I said. She looked at me with a mix of hopelessness and rage. I tried to tell you not to come down here, she said with quiet forcefulness. I'm sure we can find some way to. She shook her head violently. You don't understand, she said, looking me straight in the eyes for the first time. This is the trap. She stood up straight for the first time since I had seen her in the church, took off my jacket and tossed it behind her. She was beautiful, even though she was covered in filth. My children need food, she said, stretching out her arm. In an instant, 2 deformed creatures appeared and stood beside her. She stroked the thinning hair on their heads as they cooed at her. So, there was no woman in the camper, I said, trying to stall for time until I could come up with a plan. Oh no, there was a woman. She was taken to the birthing house. She will give my children their own children. Against her will, of course. She looked at me with disdain. She is a tool that we will use to survive, just like my ancestors were treated as tools to be used in the mines. I glanced around the room and saw several more creatures emerge from the shadows and advance slowly toward me. I knew that I was trapped. My mind scrambled for some plan, any plan to escape the horrors that awaited for me. I glanced at the 3 mangled bodies dangling from the ceiling and knew that would be my fate. I made my decision and I didn't hesitate to implement it. In a flash, I drew my pistol and I shot her in the forehead. The sound was still echoing when I started to run back to the passageway that I had come from. I hoped that the shock of seeing their mother die would give me a head start, before the horde of creatures hunted me down and tore me to shreds. Time seemed to move in slow motion. I felt like I was running underwater. Every move, every step seemed incredibly slow. I knew that they would catch me, there was no doubt in my mind. It was only a matter of time. The only thing that kept me from giving up was the sheer will to live. I swung the flashlight as I ran, making shadows jump and fly around. I arrived at the bottom of the stairs much sooner than I thought possible, and I threw myself up them 2 at a time, praying that I didn't trip. The horde was hot on my heels, and I could hear them getting closer. The grunts and snarls spurred me on even faster. I felt something brush against my heel and I knew that I had to act. I didn't bother to look back. I fired 2 shots into the closest one. I heard the inhuman scream and the sound of falling bodies. I risked a glance back to see them all tumbling down the stairs. I breathed a sigh of relief as I reached the door and struggled to pry my knife out of the wood. After a few agonizingly long seconds, it came free, and I dove through the door. Much to my surprise and relief, the church was empty. They must have all gone another way to trap me below. I looked over at the dozens of glowing candles and ran straight toward them, knocking over as many as I could. I ran to the far wall and did the same on my way out of the door. Once I was through, I turned back and jammed my knife into the door as though they wouldn't open. I didn't waste time celebrating my close escape. I ran down the middle of the street so that I would have a good view of anybody or anything chasing me. It didn't take long until I heard footsteps behind. They sounded more like a pack of dogs chasing me. I glanced back and sure enough, there were half a dozen deformed creatures in hot pursuit against the backdrop of the church engulfed in flame. I took some solace in the fact that at least some of the unnatural things must have burned up in the blaze. I had a stitch in my side and my leg muscles burned, but I didn't dare slow down. Even at the speed that I was running, they were catching up. I wasn't sure if I would make it to the truck before they got me. It was going to be close. I reached the truck and breathed a sigh of relief that I had unlocked it. By the time that I got the keys in the ignition and started it, they were on me. I locked the doors and slammed it into reverse as the first body flew into my windshield, shattering it. I got some momentum going as another landed on my hood and another grabbed my door handle. I swung the truck around and slammed on the brakes, sending them flying. I threw it in drive and stomped on the gas, spraying gravel. I hadn't gone more than a few yards when another freak landed in the truck bed and started pounding on the cabin roof. I could see the dents getting deeper. It would be through soon. Suddenly, the pounding stopped. I kept my eye on the road but turned to see what was happening. It smashed through my rear window, grabbing me by the neck. I swerved to try to break its grip, but to no avail. I could feel myself starting to black out. I knew that would be a death sentence. I pointed my gun out the window, but the creature grabbed it before I could aim at it. My mind raced faster than the truck that was hurtling down the dirt road at breakneck speed. I was seeing stars. I knew that it was a matter of minutes until the end, if not seconds. I squeezed the trigger. The gun went off right beside its head, missing it by a few inches. I was done. It howled in pain and fear at the sound and the heat of the round going off. Amazingly, it let go of the gun. I aimed it again and squeezed the trigger. Blood rained on me as its head snapped back and it fell into the bed of the truck with a heavy thump. I sat the gun on the seat beside me as I breathed huge gulps of air, wiping the red out of my eyes. My vision returned just in time for the turn onto the main road. The tires screeched as they bit into the asphalt on the way to the ranger station. I got there shortly after sunrise, pulled into a parking space and sat back in the seat. Exhaustion and adrenaline crash sapped my energy, and I fell asleep. I woke to the sound of someone knocking at my window. I whipped around, grabbed the gun off the seat, and swung it back around at the window. "Whoa there, son," the older ranger said, raising his hands. "What's got your panties in a bunch?" I took a deep breath, lowered the gun in the window, and then told him the whole story. The longer that I went, the more serious he became. Until the story was done, his face was made of granite. He stuck his hand in the window. "Keys," he said. I pulled the keys out of the ignition and handed them to him. "Go inside and get yourself cleaned up. I'll take care of this." I stepped out of the truck on shaky legs and walked into the ranger station, threw away my bloody uniform and took a long shower. By the time that I had finished and changed into a fresh uniform, the other ranger was back. He stepped inside the station and scanned the room until he found me. "All taken care of," he said with a crooked smile. "What do you mean?" I said. "Did you call the police?" He looked around at the handful of rangers that were milling around the room trying to make it look like they weren't listening to our conversation. "Yeah, we're not going to get the police involved in this," he said. "What? Why not?" He looked at me with an odd determination in his eyes. "So you really killed her, did ya?" he said. "Of course, it was her or me." "Most of the folks around here give that place a wide berth," he said. "There are signs all over saying no trespassing in danger. You would think that it was almost natural selection for those who ignore all the warnings. But those travelers, and then there are others who visit the place on the down low, all quiet like," he said as if he hadn't said anything. "Those folks might say you robbed them of their fun. You might even call them conjugal visits. There might even be some of those folks in this very room." I stared at him in disbelief and then looked around the room and saw every set of eyes focused on me. There wasn't a smile or even a hint of one that suggested this was a joke. He clapped his hand on my shoulder. "Why don't you head home and rest today?" he said. "You've had a long night. We'll take care of things." He ushered me toward the door, pausing before opening it. "Just remember that nothing happened," he said, "because if the police get an anonymous phone call, we might have to drive out and grab a couple of children to come visit your house in the middle of the night. You get me?" I nodded my head in a daze as he opened the door. That's the story I tell when people don't take the hint and stay away from the town. It's been years, and every once in a while I hear of travelers that disappeared in that area. I shake my head and wonder. I work as a park ranger in the Deep South. My assistant was a member of a cult, the lone survivor of an event orchestrated to get their souls free passage onto the nearest UFO. His name is Jay Hardwick, and mine is Jay Salem. To avoid confusion, everybody just calls him Wiki, and me Little J, even though I despise that nickname and always have. The Little J thing is an old and rather worn out joke, as I stand about 7 feet tall. My parents were also monstrously tall, and their parents before them too, and so on and so forth. Probably all the way back to the time of the Denisovans. Just like Great Danes are inbred for their gargantuan size, apparently my family followed a similar policy of foolhardy eugenics. Regardless, I prefer people to just call me Jay. The little thing gets old. "Hey Jay," Hardwick said to me, "does that look normal to you?" He pointed across the field where a two-headed black bear stared at us, blinking in bewilderment. "It doesn't not look normal to me, and just ignore it. Rule number 1 of the job is to always ignore everything that doesn't immediately threaten your life. And even some of the stuff that does, maybe." I looked down from the bear, but Hardwick was still frowning. "He has a hat on." I looked up, and Hardwick was right. One of the bear's 2 heads had a Herbalife cap on. "Well, that's not against the law," I said. "Bears can wear hats." "Yeah, but it is a scam," he said. "That's not against the law," I said. "Americans have the right to participate in any scam they want." "Okay, but..." Hardwick raised his index finger for emphasis. "It isn't even sunny out. Why the hat?" "Hardwick, I feel like you're asking the wrong questions here," I said. "Siamese twins, 2-headed bears, flying saucers from outer space. These things all happen. The real question is, do I care?" I shook my head. "You need to learn the ropes of this job if you're going to become a park ranger like me. Rule number 2, do the least work possible all the time, and maybe even less than if you need to. Don't make yourself look too good or people will be expecting you to do things all the time." And that comes back to rule number 1, which is to ignore nearly everything strange or weird. I tapped my nose in confidence at him. If you do almost nothing from the start, people will expect nothing from you, and then you have nowhere to go but up. "Yeah, but you've been in the same position at the same pay for 10 years, so..." He shrugged. "Point taken, Hardwick." I just looked back down to the magazine that I was reading. Some rag about Bigfoot sightings in British Columbia, and how Elvis was just spotted alive and well, in a bathroom in Guatemala somewhere. Hardwick was an average-looking guy, 6 feet tall with a man bun and pale gray eyes. He had 2 degrees from Stanford, but decided that he would rather work here for some reason that I never asked him about. He currently sat in the ranger station looking out the window, still observing the bear. As usual, we were understaffed and weird stuff was happening. Weird stuff seemed to always happen when we were understaffed. Almost as if the universe knew that we had 2 people working in a 100-square-mile park and could do almost nothing about any of it. Management would try to fix the problem, occasionally hire some new blood, some motivated youngsters who thought they could change the world, or save the environment or whatever it is kids wanted nowadays. But as soon as they realized just how strange and dangerous the park was, most of them quit. Some of them disappeared, never to be seen or heard from again. The only exception so far was Hardwick, because he said that he had seen far weirder things in the UFO cult. I'm not sure that I believed him. Nothing could be weirder than Goreham Park. At that moment, Sheriff Ames burst in the door. He was a good old boy from a plantation family, and moreover, he had the strangest and most aesthetically unappealing body that I had ever seen. His legs and arms were thin and emaciated, like sticks, but his gut and chest were huge. He looked like a walking barrel with 4 skin-colored twigs attached. I don't even know how his legs supported his massive gut. His watery blue eyes and protuberant nose were a maze of burst capillaries from lifelong alcoholism, and his southern drawl was so thick that even I only picked up about 1 word out of 2 that came out of his mouth. "Hey y'all," he said, nodding his head at me and Hardwick. Hardwick turned around to face the newcomer. You ever end up calling the dep about those meth labs that exploded back there?" He pointed his shaky, crooked finger towards the woods. "Last week, a meth lab had caught fire and started a small brush fire. Exploded was in my book a little bit too strong of a word, but then again, I wasn't a law enforcement agent. None of this was too out of the ordinary. Meth labs were found all over the deep south and sometimes they caught fire. What was bizarre was that the meth cook had apparently cut off his own feet, hands and head, and then nailed these to random trees in a 100-foot radius around the burnt-out lab. The cops, as usual, ruled this death as self-inflicted. Anything they didn't want to deal with was inevitably ruled this or an accident, especially if it involved somebody that nobody would ever notice was missing. I think all the townies knew that it was a lie, but the police force was so underfunded that they had to cut corners somewhere. I respected that, and knew that it was just a part of life in small-town America. Oh, yeah, the Department of Environmental Protection said the whole area is totally FUBAR. Hardwick sat behind me. The sheriff looked at him with bleary eyes. The environmental guy told me that it's going to take at least 6 weeks to clean the area. I elaborated. Actually, I think they have some people working down there right now. They said the toxic chemicals in the area are off the charts. Apparently lots of dumping and... I could tell that he wasn't listening anymore. His eyes roved around the small ranger's shack, where I currently sat and where Hardwick stood by the window. "Y'all know what I think the problem is with these kids nowadays?" the sheriff asked me. I thought to myself, no, but I bet you're about to tell me. Satanism. There's a whole lot of creepy stuff going on around here, and it all boils down to old Satan. These kids have no sense of Jesus Christ, no sense of pride or our country, he said, motioning from me to Hardwick as if I didn't get the insinuation. It's for the dissolution of our once great nation. I'll tell you that right now. Huh? Hardwick said, stroking his goatee. That about summarized my thoughts on it too. And by the way, did you ever find out more about that suicide back there? Oh, you mean the guy who cut his feet and hands off with a power saw? The sheriff asked, his eyes widening. Well, we know he was the one cooking that crap. I kind of assumed that, I said, but the sheriff cut me off. The second, we found traces of some weird stuff in his meth. I guess it isn't even meth, technically, though a lot of it is. But some of it was crap that we ain't never seen around here before. Acetyl alpha methcanonone. This and bromo birdifly, that and a bunch of other bizarre hallucinogens and bath salts that would send anyone over the edge, man. I'm guessing we're gonna be seeing a lot more psychotic drug breakdowns around here in this town before the week's end, assuming that stuff got out into the community. The sheriff shrugged apathetically at me. Nothing I can do about it anyway. Just gotta carry a 45 for protection. A 22 don't do nothing to those nut jobs on bath salts. They laugh it off like it's some sort of paintball gun. He raised his hand to the ceiling. Word to my mother. I've seen it happen. So you think he was sampling his own product and went insane on it? Somehow cut himself up like that with a bandsaw? I asked, generally curious as to how the sheriff would react. He leaned close to me, a subtle smell of rum and some other sweet spirit on his breath wafting over me, and he whispered, as if he were confiding the answer to the mystery of life, the universe, and everything else to me. Instead, he told me the most obvious statement that I had heard all week. I don't think he did it to himself, boy, he said, shrugging his eyebrows up and down as he talked. Sure, a man could cut off his feet easily enough with a bandsaw. Maybe even the head, too. But the hands. How in God's green earth could he get the hands? I shrugged my eyebrows back at him in what I hoped was a non-threatening, brotherly gesture. Geez, I never thought that maybe he was murdered, I said, hoping that I sounded serious. I mean, what if he had jerry-rigged the bandsaw to keep running? Like put a heavy band around the trigger and then fell into it with both his hands after getting his feet. Then he saved his head for last. Maybe somebody hopped up on enough drugs could ignore the pain long enough to get through that. Sheriff Ames shook his bulldog-like face, loose skin rippling as he looked down at the well-worn wooden counter between us. Nah, not a sign of jerry-rigging or anything else in the area. CSI would have definitely found it by now, he said. I had my doubts, but I kept them to myself. According to my research, law enforcement investigative techniques actually have a long history of mistakes and overall negligence, and it sent countless innocent people to prison. Hardwick sat behind us, perking up like he always did when rambling about a subject that he knew, and he knew about nearly everything. He read a book one day, seemed to remember everything, and didn't find any subject too boring to study. The only area of expertise where they don't have an insanely high error rate is DNA testing. But the rest, bite mark evidence and hair sampling and even fingerprinting, the error rate is so high that it puts thousands of innocents into prison alone in. The sheriff cut him off, lifting his hand up as if he were flicking away a housefly. Look, boys, I ain't come here to talk about studies. I don't care, honest. It ain't my job and I trust my men. But I actually need a favor from you, he said, looking mainly at me with a small glance towards Hardwick, as if sizing him up. Seeming satisfied with what he saw, he continued. Do you remember when those Satanists killed that little girl? The sheriff asked. I nodded silently. I need y'all to go back there and see if somebody drops something small. Maybe just a bracelet or a necklace. We got a tip that certain undesirables are visiting the site. I wondered who would have given him the tip, or how they could have known who was visiting what miles in the woods. And I certainly didn't know about any Satanists. From what I had seen, what had been done to that little girl was savage. It was done by a monster, not a human being. And nobody had ever been caught for the crime. Yet somehow the local media had known that it was Satanists, as if by magic. No one ever wanted to acknowledge that there were demons and monsters in the park, and they would attribute it to anything they could as long as they could avoid it. Sure, Sheriff, I said, nodding. Hardwick and I have to go on patrols today anyway. We can stop by the area. After nodding and shaking my hand, Sheriff Ames took off in his car, leaving just Hardwick and I alone in the ranger station. I turned to notice that the two-headed bear had gone. He had probably left before Ames even got there. At that moment, the phone rang. Hardwick picked it up, tilting his head slightly. Hello, ranger station, how may I help you? He said quickly. He pulled the phone away from his ear slightly, grimacing, and then handed it to me. It's for you. I took it begrudgingly, holding it at arm's length as if it was a poisonous snake getting ready to strike. But after taking a deep breath, I put it to my ear. This is the head ranger on duty. How can I help you? I will eat your soul, a deep, demonic voice said, coming through the phone at an amazingly loud, eardrum-shattering volume. I will kill everyone you love in front of you and rip off your skin. I'll burn your town to the ground, for I am the destroyer of stars, the devourer of worlds, and the bringer of the dead lights. You will all tremble before me. Before I'm done with you, you will. Sir, are you sure you have the right number? I asked. I mainly just clean up the trails around here. You dare interrupt me, the voice screamed, making my right ear ring. I winced, pulling the phone further away. Listen to me and listen closely. If you go to the spot where the girl's sacrifice was performed, you will die. Stay far away. If you want to extend your puny life by even a single minute, you will avoid the areas that we have deemed holy ground. Remember this, or today will be a day of endless torment and pain for you. And with that, the phone call ended. The dial tone seemed so quiet and serene by comparison that I forgot to hang it up. What was that about? Hardwick asked, curious. Wrong number, I said, walking the phone back to the cradle. All right, let's get this over with. We need to go to the spot where that little girl died and see if we can't help somehow. I sighed. I guess we better do it while there's still daylight, as I really don't want to be trapped out there after dark. We grabbed some protein bars, water, and a couple walking sticks, and we headed out. As we got a few miles out on the packed dirt trail, mostly walking in silence and enjoying the scenery and the smell of pines and maple, Hardwick lit up a joint. Hardwick, you shouldn't be smoking that on the job, I said. In fact, you shouldn't be smoking it at all. It makes you stupid and it makes you smell like a skunk ate another skunk and then crapped him out. Hardwick shrugged, ignoring my point. I just don't get how the sheriff knew somebody was visiting the site, Hardwick said, or why he just couldn't go out himself or send one of his cop buddies to do it. Why come to us? None of this makes any sense. I have a feeling that if Sheriff Ames tried to hike 5 miles off the beaten path, up and down all these hills, his heart would explode and that would just give us more paperwork to do. Besides, I said, stopping to move a large branch off the trail, we need to clean the pathways up anyway. I haven't been out this way in over a month. As I dragged the immensely heavy oak branch towards a deep pile of brush 10 paces or so off the trail, I saw a long arm begin to snake out from behind a tree and approach Hardwick. It looked like an optical illusion at first, because the tree was only a couple of feet wide, but the arm that came out looked like it went on forever. By the time that I noticed it, literally 10 feet of white bony arm had extended and it was still coming out, like a massive cobra uncoiling from a tiny basket, at the tune of some invisible snake charmer. Hardwick, I said, my mouth suddenly going dry. I could only point silently while the blood drained from my face, as the arm came to within inches of his shoulder. He raised one eyebrow at me as he took another inhalation off the joint, and then everything went crazy. The arm grabbed him with an iron vice-like grip and dragged him out of view so fast that he looked like nothing more than a Hardwick-sized blur to me. Behind me, the same voice that I had heard on the phone began to speak. You couldn't wait to meet death, to die screaming and watch your friend be torn apart limb from limb. The demonic voice said, incredibly deep and resonant. I felt every word shake my bones as it spoke. I turned and saw one of the most hideously deformed creatures that I could ever imagine. It stood over 15 feet tall with the same endless bony arms as the other one that had come from behind the tree. It was entirely naked, bone white, emaciated and nightmarish looking in every sense of the word. Its eyes looked like pure white cataracts with a thin bluish film near the pupil. Its skin clung so tightly to its body that I could see every rib and bone that composed it. Its nose looked like the thin slit nose of a snake, and its ears were missing. But its smile was the most disturbing part. It had a grin that looked far too wide for its face, showing off dozens of bleeding, sharp little teeth. Small rivulets of blood ran down from its mouth, leaving pink streaks over the bottom portion of its entire face. From behind me, I heard Hardwick shout and then a gunshot. I turned and saw Hardwick holding a pistol, another creature like the one before me holding him 10 feet off the ground. Its other long arm snaked out and whipped the gun out of Hardwick's hand, sending it flying far away into the brush, and I knew that we were doomed. Hardwick always carried a small .22 on him for protection, but I had nothing more deadly than a Swiss Army knife on me. And then, just as all hope had left me, I heard a roar from behind me and the scream of pain from the creature that had spoken to me. Turning quickly, I saw the two-headed bear bound out of the woods and ripped into the monster's thin, immensely long leg. With a quick snapping sound, one of the heads snapped its femur, sending a spike of bone out through the monster's flesh. I heard Hardwick fall with a grunt as the other creature dropped him and began to draw forward, planning an attack on the bear. But with all of its attention on the main threat, it didn't see me as I ran at him from the other side, raising my walking stick and whacking it across the head as hard as I could. I heard a crack of bone and then the creature looked unsteady, stumbling along for a few steps before falling. The two-headed bear quickly rushed forward and went for its throat. "Hardwick, run," I said, pulling him up and heading back to the ranger station. I don't think either of us have ever sprinted 3 or 4 miles so fast before in our lives. I thought at multiple points that I might pass out, but we made it back to the station in record time, panting heavily and chugging water after water, before slumping down against the wall. We looked at each other. "Did we just get saved by that bear?" he asked me. I nodded, smiling. "I think we owe that two-headed bugger quite a bit," I said. "Heck, I'll buy it a whole steak dinner with mashed potatoes. He deserves it." "Why do you think he saved us?" I could only shake my head, having no answer. Things continued to get weirder after that, and I know at least one of those monsters and two-headed bear survived because I would run into them later that week. I wasn't going to give up on being a park ranger just because of a couple near-death experiences after all. This was my place and I felt like I belonged to it, just like I hoped it belonged to me in some way. Later on, I would immensely regret not reaching the site of that girl's murder, as the sheriff had been right. There was a necklace there and it would cause a heap of trouble later on. But that's a story for next time. After we had returned to the ranger station, I had a couple of shots to calm my nerves. Looking down, I realized that I had been spattered in the blue-black blood of the creature from the forest. Tiny droplets had dried on my arms, chest, and face, and as I licked my lips, I realized that I just ate a little of the blood too. I gagged for a second, furiously wiping at my mouth and spitting on the floor. Wiki seemed mostly unaffected by what had just happened. He was a teetotaler, avoiding all alcohol but smoking cannabis, and occasionally even taking psychedelics. Whenever I drank, he always told me, "Alcohol rots your brain and kills your liver," though I doubted any of that would matter if the things in this park got to me first. I was looking into my empty shot glass with trembling hands when Sheriff Ames came into the ranger station, flanked by 2 agents in black suits and sunglasses. "Back already?" I asked him. He didn't respond. "Care for a drink?" He looked at the bottle of Sky vodka and seemed to consider, then glanced at the agents next to him and shook his head no. "Son, did you find anything out there?" he asked in a fatherly tone, his drawl receding a bit now that he apparently had company from one federal agency or another. "We had a bit of a problem," I said. Hardwick nodded. "Wiki, little J," the sheriff said, turning toward Hardwick. "Did you actually search the area? I need to know. We had a tip that somebody involved had dropped a critical piece of evidence." "You don't understand, Sheriff," Hardwick said. "We were attacked." I tried motioning to him subtly with my eyes, but I think I just made a weird face, one that failed to communicate anything. I was trying to tell him without words that spouting off about 15-foot tall, emaciating monsters with grins as wide as basketballs would probably be a bad idea, and make us look totally insane to boot. It didn't work. I swear we were less than a mile away from the site where the little girl's body was found, when something grabbed me out of nowhere. It was an arm, but not human. The arm must have been 12 feet long. It was like something out of a Lovecraft story. The thing that it was attached to, words could not describe how horrible it looked. Its eyes were like filmy blue cataracts, Its grin made the Cheshire cat look like nothing. Its fingers were bony claws and blood dribbled down its mouth constantly, as if it were chewing on its own tongue. And the smell, it smelled like burning metal, like failing car brakes combined with cooking onions, with a little bit of rotten meat thrown in for good measure. Hardwick stopped and took a deep breath, and then looked from Sheriff Ames to the two agents. They all stared at him deadpan. "Son," the sheriff said, "you didn't take any drugs today, did you?" In fact, Hardwick had smoked a joint, but I wasn't about to say that. They already were looking at us like we were a danger, raging psychotics who had somehow escaped from the loony bin and stolen a couple of ranger uniforms. One of the agents was writing in a notepad, talking softly to himself, saying things like, "Seeing monsters, rotting onions, a bony dribble." "Wiki," I said quietly, "please let me do the talking." Hardwick frowned but nodded. "Sheriff, what he means is, I think we were attacked by two people wearing masks. It all happened very fast, but they were tall, and he's right about that. Very long arms. Had to be some sort of costume or makeup job. Perhaps two members trying to cover their identities with some cheap Halloween costume. Of course, all of that was total BS. I knew those two things were not human, and they definitely had no masks on. But would it do any good to tell the truth in this situation? At best, it would be laughed off, and at worst, the police would think of us untrustworthy and fail to take us seriously in the future." Okay, Sheriff Ames said thoughtfully, reconsidering his pitch. "I believe you, Ranger." With this, he gently put a hand on my shoulder, as if calming down a child having a temper tantrum. "These are Agents Rowe and Jimenez from the FBI. They're investigating similar cases across the U.S. where children were taken and apparently used in some kind of sacrifice. That little girl had her heart taken out, and that wasn't the only internal organ missing. Apparently there's a pattern of these bizarre cases with the organs removed, and because it crosses state lines, the FBI is adding its resources to ours so we can hopefully catch the people who are doing this." Sheriff Ames shook his bulldog-like face ruefully, looking down at the ground. "Ranger Salem," Agent Rose said, stepping forward, his face lacking any discernible emotion. "Have you by any chance found any jewelry abandoned on the path around the park? I know it's a long shot, but as other crime scenes, there was always a piece of jewelry left days or weeks after the murder had taken place, as if the suspect came back and planted it, maybe in an attempt to send some kind of message to law enforcement. The jewelry never belongs to the murder victim or anybody known to the victim. In fact, a lot of it appears connected to voodoo or some kind of witchcraft, generally with obsidian carvings. Does any of this ring a bell?" I shook my head. "I'm sorry, no. We can try to go back to the scene." "No way," Hardwick cried, but I gave him a look that shushed him. "But we would like additional protection. Of course, we can guide you both there, but we were just attacked a couple of hours ago and I believe the suspects are still roaming the trails." "I am not going back there," Hardwick muttered silently. "Yeah, no way. I don't get paid enough to die at the hands of some cheap Slenderman knockoff." I smiled slightly at this. "Actually, now that we have federal resources involved in the case, we don't really need you to physically return to the site," Agent Rose said. "But if you could draw us a map of the trails, including the less traveled ones, and their relation to the murder site, it would help us." I nodded and got a piece of paper. While I'm no Da Vinci, I did a passable job of connecting the spiderweb of trails and labeling them. And with that, the two agents left, heading behind the ranger station towards the first of the trails that would lead deep into the woods. "Boy, oh boy," Sheriff Ames said, pouring himself a shot now that his federal babysitters were gone. "This is gonna be a mess. Anytime the feds step in, they make things so much worse. In my experience, anyway." He took the shot back like a pro, not even grimacing as the burning liquid went down. Without hesitation, he poured himself another one and knocked that back as well. While I'm off to the station, your job is to help those agents in any way they see fit. If they tell you to jump, ask how high. Quicker we get this mess sorted out, the quicker they can leave. With that word of advice, he tipped his hat to me and headed back to his car. As I heard him take off, his muffler sounding as if it was about to fall off as he peeled away, an old broken rust bucket of a truck pulled in. It was a local that I knew well, a rancher named Bud Beacon with more kids than teeth and a sickly yellow cast to his skin. He had a Budweiser hat on and a grease-stained plaid shirt with multiple missing buttons on it. He stumbled in and he did not look healthy. He had never looked healthy, but now he really didn't look good. Due to budget cuts, the ranger station also doubled as a small convenience store to try to bring some extra income to the park. We sold odds and ends like umbrellas, trail maps, hats, hiking shoes, and some food and drink. Because there were no other stores around for miles, the locals often came here, despite our high markup, and suspiciously missing expiration date labels on many of the items. Bud Beacon was one of our more regular customers. "Good afternoon, Bud," I said, nodding my head at him. He acted disoriented as if he didn't know where he was, and kept stumbling into the racks and walls, knocking some sunglasses to the ground before kicking over an umbrella stand. He said, a slight puddle of drool coming out of his mouth. "Do you sell, He pantomimed, unbuckling a bra and sucking an imaginary nipple. I had no idea what he was talking about. "I think we may be out of that right now, but maybe check Walmart or Costco," I said, giving him a reassuring smile. His eyes rolled back and forth, never focusing on me for a second. "Bud, you feeling okay? You look a little under the weather." That was the understatement of the century. He looked like he might collapse and have a seizure at any moment. "They took my kid," he said. And with horror, I realized that he had a massive slice in the back of his skull. It looked as if somebody had sent a throwing knife into the back of his head. I hadn't seen it before since he was facing me, but he put his head down and I saw the back of his shirt was totally covered in blood. "Wiki," I said, "I think we have a problem." Hardwick looked up from his phone, his mouth opening in astonishment, as he saw all the blood on Bud's back and head. He approached him cautiously and began speaking like someone talking to a rabid dog, whose testicles were caught on a piece of razor wire, very softly and slowly. "Oh, hey buddy," he said, putting his hands out, palms up. "What happened to you? Do you need us to call someone?" "Of course he needs us to call someone," I shouted at Hardwick. His freaking skull is split open. But Bud grabbed my hand in a vice-like grip and brought it to his lips and then began whispering, "No, don't worry about me. My boy is in the woods, still alive, kidnapped," he said, his words becoming increasingly disjointed and drawn out before he lost consciousness, toppling backwards onto the well-worn hardwood floor. A small puddle of blood began to pool around his head as his glassy eyes stared up at the ceiling, his face taking on an animalistic and terrified cast as he swam between consciousness and unconsciousness. "Wiki, call the police," I said, breathing hard and looking around quickly. I saw nothing out of the windows to alert me to imminent danger, but I had the feeling of being watched. "The state police," I amended, thinking of Sheriff Ames' alcoholic bulldog eyes. The town cops had never been much use around here, except at covering up crimes and displaying a level of incompetence that I could only characterize as admirable. I thought I did the least amount of effort required in my job, but locals like Sheriff Ames really put me to shame on so many levels. Hardwick was already one step ahead of him, and I heard him murmuring to the dispatcher behind me. I stopped and wondered, How had Bud driven here with such extensive head trauma? He was barely aware and conscious enough to formulate a sentence, less likely to drive a car through the poorly maintained and pothole-ridden roads of our dilapidated southern town. I walked around the desk and peered out the front door. I saw that he had totally demolished the ranger station mailbox a couple 100 feet away, where the dirt road met pavement, and that his truck had 4 flat tires. Some of the tires were so badly worn away that he had apparently driven on the broken, rusty rims for the last part of his journey. The rotors and rims were all shot, and the car would definitely need to be towed out of here. Taking a deep breath, I walked out the door and decided to take a look around. Maybe his son was out here somewhere. I began to circle the log cabin facade of the station, going behind the dumpsters when I saw a familiar face. Or rather, 2 familiar faces. It was the 2-headed bear who had saved my and Hardwick's lives earlier in the day. He stared at me with a calm and passive intelligence that I had never seen on any animal's face before, and then started speaking, except his mouth wasn't moving. It was like he was speaking directly into my head, bypassing the auditory facilities entirely. "And don't be scared, Jay," the one on the right said, nodding his head and baring his teeth in a simultaneously friendly and terrifying gesture. For once, I did not have to look down at the person, or in this case, a bear person, who conversed with me. Even though I stood around 7 feet tall, the bear stood only an inch or 2 less than that, his front paws at his sides in a very human-like stance. "My name is Rolf." He ceased speaking, and the one on the left, who still had his Herbalife hat on, continued. "And my name is Grolf." They had 2 separate voices. Rolf's voice was considerably deeper and slower, while Grolf spoke quickly in a more excitable and high-pitched cadence. "We've been watching you for a long time," Rolf continued. "You have potential, and I believe you are one of the few things keeping the evil in these woods contained. If it weren't for you, it would spill out into the world and all would be lost. Are you sure you have the right guy?" I asked aloud, looking between the 2 heads. I mean, I've had the same job since high school. I have 0 friends except maybe Wiki, but he's kind of forced to be here with me, so maybe that doesn't even count. I can't even get a credit card and 2 of my toes are fused together. None of that strikes me as hero of the century kind of stats. I paused for a moment and then continued. "I do still have all my teeth though. I guess that's fairly unusual for this town." And Grolf shook his head, a bemused expression crossing his intelligent, furry face. "Do not underestimate yourself. You are told by your society that unless you have many friends, constant beautiful women, and 10 whole toes, then you're a failure. But you have something much more valuable inside of you." He pointed to my heart with his right front paw. "You have chutzpah, grit, the ability to run into a situation even when the odds are clearly stacked against you. You have no idea how rare that is in your species. Did you not put your life on the line just to find a necklace that could solve a little girl's death earlier today?" "Oh, I think you're confused," I said. "That's just because I'm stupid. I don't really worry about death when—" "Enough," Rolf said with an audible low growl emanating from his black lips, silencing me instantly. "We have no time for frivolous arguments. You're the one we need to save this forest, and that's that. If you want to stop this evil from flowing out into your town, your state, and eventually your whole world, you will listen to what we have to say. Time is short." Okay, I said, nodding. "A child has been taken from the litter of the man you call Bud," Grolf continued. "He is special, and within his mind, he's more powerful than the greatest saint or magician your kind can imagine. You must save his life. If he dies, all will be lost. The Tall Ones plan to bring him to these sacrificial grounds by tonight, to the same spot where the girl's body was found. You must save him at any cost." I nodded. "We will give you a seal that will allow you to pass through the woodlands at night. unattacked by any of the forest guardians, Grolf said, pulling a small vial from his back somewhere. I really don't know where it came from because it wasn't like he had any pockets or clothes or anything else that could possibly hold a vial. On second thought, I didn't want to think of where he may have pulled it out from. The two-headed bear began to do a slow, rhythmic dance, moving one foot and then the other, and then raising his paws to the sky and looking up with his two heads. He opened the elixir with his teeth and poured it out onto his hand. He then began to shake his furry butt as he moved forward in a kind of dance-like motion, before wiping it on his forehead. The elixir, I mean, not his butt. The elixir was cold and smelled like licorice, but it dried quickly, leaving no trace on my skin. Now I must go, but I will see you again. Take care and try not to die. Okay, I said. I'll do my best as always and not to die. No promises, though. I went back into the ranger station and Bud Beacon was gone. Wiki was sitting behind the counter smoking a cigarette and looking at his hands. Wiki, what happened? Where's Bud? He looked up suddenly, a confused frown creasing his face. He then looked down on the floor where Bud was lying and then back up at me, then around the entire ranger station. And then he shrugged. Are you serious right now? How did you lose track of an unconscious man who was just bludgeoned in the head, and he was bleeding all over the place? Well, in my defense, I wasn't actually paying attention. I rolled my eyes at this. Just then, one of the agents came running into the ranger station, his suit torn, a nasty gash across his forehead, dripping red into his eyes. It was Agent Rowe. There was no sign of Agent Jimenez, which I took as an extremely bad sign. Agent Rowe had his pistol out and was breathing at an alarmingly fast rate. His pupils were dilated and his eyes were wide and roving around, and he looked like he was overall not having a good day. Lock the doors, he screamed. Do you have any more weapons in here? Move. I calmly walked behind him and engaged with the deadbolt on the front door. Wiki took another drag of his cigarette, calmly looking the agent up and down. So, Wiki asked, how did it go? How did it go? How did it go? He screamed back at him. My partner's dead and I barely got away. They ripped his arms off his torso and flung them at me like some kind of arm-shaped boomerang. His metaphor game was not up to par, but I wasn't going to criticize, as I felt that he was in a very trigger-happy mood. Okay, I said comfortingly. We'll go and check it out. Wiki looked at me like I was insane. No, we most certainly will not go check it out, he said to me. Well, we'll have to at least find Bud, I said. You're the one who let him get away after all. All you had to do was watch over an unconscious man and you failed at that. I know I talk about setting the bar low, but I shook my head in disappointment. That blows even me out of the water. After a minute of discussion, the FBI agent gave us one of his guns. He apparently had an ankle holster with a judge attached at the last resort. Not the kind of judge that sentences you to 30 days for urinating in the local fountain downtown, but rather a squat kind of pistol that shoots shotgun slugs. It felt heavy in my hand and looked totally awesome. The FBI agent had another pistol, a .45, but he wasn't going to part ways with it under any circumstances. Wiki agreed to come with me for a little while at least. We moved the barricade out in front of the door, and after heaving a deep sigh, I stepped outside. Wiki stayed behind me, his little .22 held out in his hand, now reloaded with spare bullets from the station. I had a lot more faith in the stopping power of the judge than some little .22, however. As I stepped away from the building, I realized something was monumentally wrong. The entire forest sounded as silent as a grave. Somehow it also looked darker, and there was a smell in the air like rotting meat mixed with burning plastic. The smell was so pervasive that it felt thick, like it had its own weight. I felt it on my tongue, my nose, and most of all my eyes, which immediately began to water. Oh my God, Wiki yelled loudly. What is that smell? I turned around to shush him, but as I did, I saw what the origin of the smell was and immediately froze. The first thing that I saw was Bud Beacon floating in the air in front of me. His eyes rolled back in his head. Dry blood caked around his hair and face and staining his shirt. Behind him, I saw a vision out of a nightmare. The man, if it was even a man, was hunched over. It looked like he had been stitched together out of dozens of bodies. The skull was half eaten away, showing the gritting teeth and jawbone underneath. Some tendrils of black flesh and liquefying goo, still holding on against all odds. It looked like somebody had stitched 4 arms to a gigantic torso, which now clenched and unclenched their blackened fingers in unison. The blue hues of oxygen deprivation trailing streaks all the way up to his shoulders. He had 2 immensely long legs, twice the height of a normal human leg, which made him stand taller than me, at least 8 feet, and towering over the floating form of Bud Beacon in front of him. In the center of his decaying face stood a single massive eye, bloody teardrops running out of it as it constantly looked right, left, up, and down and in all directions. He opened his mouth to speak, and as the words came out, so did a fresh wave of the nauseating smell. "A favor for a favor, a life for a life," he said in a voice that sounded like thousands of voices all mixed together, rising and falling in tone randomly as he spoke. "You give up and go home, and I'll let you and your friend live. This man and his offspring are all mine. He gave them to me." The creature sent out a long forked tongue and licked the maggots off its decomposing lips. I raised the judge, pointing it at his center mass, but I couldn't get a good shot with Bud floating in between us. "How about you leave right now?" I asked in return, my voice trembling, "and I might let you live." His grin widened. From the forest to the right of us, I heard the sound of loud rustling. The son of Bud Beacon appeared, his eyes wide and tear-streaked. "Dad?" he yelled, seeing his father floating and catatonic. "Dad, what are you doing?" The distraction was all that I needed. I sprinted a few feet to my left, giving me a clear shot without risking the life of Bud, and began firing. The shotgun shells opened up large exit wounds all over the creature's torso, sending out sprays of bugs and rotten meat. But just as soon as they had opened, a writhing mass would begin to stitch the flesh back together. In all the excitement of the gunshots, I didn't realize Bud Beacon had fallen to the ground until I saw him sprawled out there, his eyes closed now, looking as if he were asleep. I continued shooting the creature as it ran at the boy until I ran out of ammo, but it did no good. The maggots just restitched its skin together as soon as the bullet exited. So I watched with horror as its 4 long arms wrapped around the crying child, and they disappeared into the forest. I turned to Wiki, who looked fairly calm and placid despite all that just happened. "Well, now we really have to go after them." His eyes widened. "You want to go after an unkillable and gag-inducing eldritch deity? What do you plan to subdue him with good manners?" I shook my head. "There's an innocent child involved, Wiki, and now we know he's alive. We can't just let him be sacrificed." He groaned. "I hope you at least have a plan," he said to me as we began trekking towards the forest. "Not at all," I replied. We had just seen Bud Beacon's child taken away by a monster who looked as if he had been stitched together by Dr. Frankenstein himself. I knew the kid's name, Smitty. I had seen him around town many times but never spoken with him. He only talked rarely and always had a 1,000-yard stare. I knew from Bud Beacon taking him to the ranger station that Smitty had a lot of weird obsessions about food. He would only eat food or drink drinks that were white or clear. So he ate a lot of rice, pasta, milk, and other staples, and drank a lot of water. Any food or drink that had any color other than white or transparency to it disgusted him to no end. If somebody tried to give him something else, he would close his mouth, turn his head away, and refuse to speak to that person for the rest of the day. So, Wiki said from my left. Are we just going to run into the woods and shoot anything that moves? I don't really have any better ideas, I admitted. Maybe that two-headed bear will come back and save us. I wish that I could have talked to him more. Seems to be the only one who really knows what's going on around here. I really wouldn't count on him bailing us out again, Wiki said. He has to be getting sick of us. I only shrugged. Well, as you know, my goal is to live forever, I said sarcastically. So far, so good. If I've made it this far, why not just keep going? Everything always seems to work out in the end. Wiki pulled a joint out of his pocket, lighting it and taking a deep hit. The sun was rapidly setting, the forest gaining an eerie, shadowy look that made it hard to see very far down the trail. And by the way, I continued, the bear is not a he, it's a they, and their names are Grolf and Rolf, they told me. Then a horrendous smell started to waft over to us. It wasn't the smell of all the dank weed that Wiki was smoking either. The smell was so strong that it immediately overpowered the smell of the cannabis. And to my terror, it was a smell that I recognized. The smell of burning metal combined with rotting meat. It was the smell of the creatures with the long arms and pale white flesh who had attacked us earlier. Wiki, I began to say, but he threw the half-smoked joint casually in the brush and just nodded. Yeah, I know, bud, he said calmly. His eyes red and slightly squinted as he looked around, a big grin on his face. Looking at him, you would think that we were at an amusement park rather than a cursed forest. They're definitely back. We're being watched. But nothing came out of the brush at us. I could smell the monstrosities, but it appeared the mark from the two-headed bear had really worked. I was passing through without being attacked by the monsters of the forest. I had a feeling the bear's mark wouldn't work on everything though. As we hiked further ahead in the dark, turning on our flashlights, the smell faded further and further behind us. We heard twigs snapping and bushes being pushed aside in the twilight darkness all around us, but we continued on. The few shots of alcohol that I had taken before leaving to calm my nerves had totally worn off, and I felt a rising sense of anxiety building up inside my chest. As we neared the site at the end of the trail where I had been told there was a sacrificial altar, a new smell began to arise. It was the odor of burning plastic. A monstrous conglomeration of many bodies stepped out from behind an oak tree to my right, blocking the path. I raised my pistol, a model called the Judge that fired shotgun shells. Grolf and Rolf gave me the mark. I demand passage. I yelled, pointing the pistol at its face where a monstrous single eye flicked back and forth, looking at me and then Wiki and then back at me again. Move aside, beast. Move aside and let us pass or I'll kill you. I really will. I hoped I sounded a lot braver than I felt. It felt like my voice was trembling and I could feel my heart racing. I kept my flashlight tucked under my armpit as I took a deep breath in and tried to steady the gun and calm my nerves. Fool, the monster cried in front of me. I am not bound by the laws of this forest. I was created from corpses in a secret location. The mark of the protector bear has no effect on me. I will give you two standing here one last chance. Turn around and never come back here and I'll let you live. For I am Raka, the strong, the unkillable, but the forgiving for those who repent. The monster said, blowing fetid air in our direction out of his reeking mouth as he yelled. The trees shook around us and I heard birds and bats fleeing in droves as leaves fell from the tallest branches showering the forest. Okay, listen up here, Raka, Wiki said, stepping in front of me. Nobody tells us where we can go or what we can do. And there's a kid back there that we're supposed to bring home. If you're so strong, why do you take mere children? Raka laughed, a deep gurgling sound that reminded me of a slug slime and moldy rotting leaves in the bottom of a lake. It sounded wet, sickly, phlegmy, and overall just disturbing. I heard movement behind Raka and men and women in black robes started to step out, forming a semicircle. Both Wiki and I had our guns pointed at the new arrivals, yet they seemed totally unafraid. "Hail Raka, the great, the strong, the unkillable," said a tall blonde woman in the front. The rest of them shouted in unison, "Hail!" "Hey, you guys stole that from somebody else. Pretty lame losers," Wiki said, laughing. "Actually, I think they stole it from the ancient Romans," I said. "You know, the whole Hail Caesar thing." Wiki gave me a sour sideways look, frowning. The cult members and the monster in front of us totally ignored our conversation. "The child is ours," Raka said, smiling a grin with far too many teeth. Many of them appeared rotted and blackened, but still sharp and extremely long. "I'm done being patient. If you take one step forward, I'll kill you both." I took one step forward. Raka's single eye widened in surprise as I raised the gun and began shooting at the cult members behind him. I knew from previous experience that shooting Raka did no good, but that was a problem that I would have to deal with later, probably in about 30 seconds. Wiki followed my lead, firing his .22 at the center mass and heads of the cult members. Within seconds, all of them were on the ground, dying or dead, blood soaking into the dried leaves of the forest floor. With a roar, Raka began to rush forwards towards me, and then everything happened very fast. From my right, a loud rustling started and out popped the two-headed bear, Grolf and Rolf. He sprinted out on all fours from a cluster of bushes nearby, slamming into Raka with an amazing speed, and sending him flying 20 feet off the trail and directly into the trunk of a huge evergreen tree. The branch went through the heart of Raka, and though the bug swarmed and tried to re-knit his flesh, he was caught. His feet moved with futility, not even touching the ground since he was suspended 5 feet above it, with the impaling branch keeping him stuck. He roared and screamed but made no progress. "Go, now," Grove said in my mind, his psychic voice echoing with a loud, clanging feeling throughout my entire consciousness. I winced at the power of this inner voice. "The boy has little time left. The altar is just ahead. You are our only hope." Well, that's not good, I muttered to myself. If I was the only hope from saving this forest, maybe this entire town, then they really were in a much crappier position than I had imagined. Wiki and I ran forward, reloading our guns as we went. A few hundred feet ahead, we saw the flickering glow of a bonfire. A round stone table about 20 feet across sat next to it. A thin, shirtless boy was tied up on top of it. Around him, cult members in black robes chanted, standing in a circle, every eye on the imprisoned boy. Once we were within range, Wiki and I began firing, my judge pistol blowing holes the size of a grapefruit into the chests of many of the members. Wiki was also a great shot, and his .22 put tiny bullet holes into the skulls of those nearest the boy, dropping them instantly. The rest of them scattered like cockroaches, the chanting stopping immediately as they ran in all directions into the forest. We took the opportunity to reload. "Let's get the kid and get the heck out of here," Wiki said, and I nodded. The sooner that we get out of here, the better, I thought to myself. Taking out a pocket knife, I quickly began to cut the bindings on the boy's hands and feet, while Wiki untied the gag around his mouth. The boy had a vacant, blank look in his eyes. I wondered whether he was in shock. "Smitty, can you hear me?" I asked loudly, but he didn't respond, just staring through me and not making eye contact. "Just grab the freaking kid and let's go. Those other things, the ones with the long arms and the pale skin, they're probably going to be back soon. You don't really know how long the protection that the bear gave you lasts, now do you?" No, I said, trying to remember. I knew logically that it didn't last forever, but would it wear off so fast? I figured we would find out on our way back. Grabbing Smitty's arm, I pulled him up from the table. He didn't resist, and when I started speed walking back towards the trail, he kept pace with me. "Thank you," Smitty said to me silently. I barely heard him but looked over at him in surprise. He glanced over at me, making eye contact for the barest fractions of a second, and then returned his gaze forwards. "Hey, little man, you're welcome," I said, smiling. "We weren't going to let you die out here. Your dad's waiting for you, too." I didn't tell him that his dad was probably waiting for him in the hospital, getting his head stitched up and his skull fractures checked out. "But we're in trouble still," Smitty said, pointing to the tree where Raka had been impaled. Looking up, I realized the branch where I had seen him suspended was now broken in half, and there was no sign of the monster, except for thick black blood and thousands of bugs on the fractured remainder. "Oh crap," Wiki and I both said at the same time as a rushing shape smelling like burning plastic and rotting meat sprinted out of the woods, grabbing Wiki and disappearing into the pitch blackness. As he was grabbed, Wiki dropped his gun, yelling in surprise. Once he realized what was happening, he started screaming at me. "Get out of here," he said. "Don't worry about me, get the kid to safety." I tried running after him, but Raka was far too fast. After a minute, I turned around and went back to the trail, where I saw Smitty patiently waiting. "No," I screamed. "We have to get him back." "Don't worry," Smitty said, his face a blank expression. "I can track them, I can track all of them. I see it like live points on a map in my..." He stopped walking, pointing to his forehead. I was panting, doubled over from sprinting. "But we need help. There are too many of them and the mark is wearing off. I see it on you like light being washed away. Your face grows darker and darker as it fades." This was the most that I had ever heard Smitty speak, and I was flabbergasted. "We will come back," I said, taking Smitty's hand and leading him to safety. We found his father, who had been picked up by a random passerby as he stumbled in the road, his face a mask of blood, his wounds untreated, the brain damage and concussions making him totally unaware of where he was or what was going on by that point. I finished telling all of this to my psychiatrist the next morning. He had been prescribing me antidepressants for my crippling depression, and even though Wiki was gone for now, I still had to go to work and keep my appointments. I knew that I would get Wiki back eventually. He was too tough and dumb to kill. The psychiatrist nodded at me as I spoke. "And do you blame yourself for what had happened to your friend Hardwick?" he asked, pushing his glasses up his nose. "No, we did what we had to do," I said, not knowing whether I was being totally truthful. Maybe I did blame myself a little bit, but I didn't want to tell this man that. He wrote a few more notes in his notepad, and then his secretary came in. "Dr. Ferenzo," the pretty brunette said. He looked up. "You have a call, it's an emergency." Nodding gravely, he got up. "Please excuse me, Jay, I'll be right back," he said, leaving the room and closing the door behind him. I got up after a minute, bored, wondering how long this was going to take. I looked at his notepad, lying face down in his brown leather chair, and frowned. Flipping it over, I saw that he hadn't been taking notes at all. He had simply drawn a picture across the entire front of the notepad. It was a picture of me, crucified to a lamppost, my eyeballs hanging out, a pentagram carved into my chest. Underneath in tiny, neat black letters he had written, "Kill the traitor." "Well," I said, putting the notepad back down, "that can't be good." The FBI offered to send me help in finding Wiki. That day, I had a team of agents and dogs with me at the ranger station. Even Sheriff Arms showed up, saying that he wanted to help in any way that he could. After all, I had risked my life and I had saved the boy. But now another adventure had to begin. I just hoped that I would find Wiki in time, and that one day I would end the evil in this forest once and for all.